food? Will people be able to get a jury that's representative of the cross-section of the community? And will that jury even feel safe participating in an in-person trial, or will it affect how they listen to the case? Will attorneys be able to seat jurors to conduct voir dire? Will they be able to observe that jury during the trial? Will the jury be able to judge a witness's credibility? Will attorneys be able to effectively conduct direct and cross-examination, make opening statements, closing arguments? Can attorneys be as persuasive in a masked and socially distanced environment or online? Will jurors be distracted or be tempted to conduct research if they're watching a trial on a computer? Will the solemnity and gravity of a trial be affected if it doesn't take place in a courtroom? How will empathy or emotion in cases be affected? How will everyone's skill or lack of skill with technology affect their cases? What about the confrontation clause in the Sixth Amendment? And which of these new litigation practices will stay after the pandemic? And can these practices actually improve the efficiency and effectiveness of our system in some respects? In these 2 days, you're going to hear from judges, court administrators, attorneys, law professors, technologists, and trial consultants from across this country, all looking to answer these questions. They will share their experiences from trials they have participated in, observations and recommendations in order to give us all the tools, resources, skills, and knowledge to allow the courts and counsel to continue to operate trials in an in-person, hybrid, and fully online capacity, and to continue providing access to those who want and need it. Let's be clear. There is no single or simple solution. However, Francis Bacon once said, if we do not maintain justice, justice will not maintain us. My hope is that this summit is the start of a wider conversation with each other, one that I hope will be ongoing. In order to keep this conversation going with NITA, we will look to publish a white paper or a practical tips guide to capture all the great recommendations you'll be getting over these 2 days and results from the survey that we hope you have or will all fill out. Additionally, we are looking to publish a collection of various orders, motions, and resources from around the country. All of the panels will be recorded and available for viewing at a later time. Now, we're not charging for this conference, but we are encouraging those who feel so inclined to contribute to a nonprofit called Everyone On, which provides technology to underserved communities and populations. We have a tremendous roster of speakers who have a great deal to share. We encourage you to write questions in the Q&A box, but apologize if we can't answer them all today because of the ground we have to cover. Next week, the programs will address more specific areas, such as planning online trials, technology and technical expertise, effectively presenting in an online forum, and online jury selection. Those will have shorter presentations, but more opportunity for panelists to answer your questions. And you can also contact the Online Courtroom Project at www.onlinecourtroom.org. I want to thank NITA for their tremendous partnership in putting on this program. It just wouldn't have happened without them. They have been incredible. I also want to thank all of our incredible sponsoring organizations, such as ABOTA, National Judicial College, American Inns of Court, Civil Jury Project, Institute for the Advancement of the American Legal System, American Society of Trial Consultants, International Academy of Trial Lawyers, Women-Owned Lawyers, the Lawyers Club of San Diego, and the Professional Development Consortium. Change is hard. When my mother graduated law school in 1954, she could not find a job as a woman lawyer. She ended up building a family law practice out of our house. When she was appointed to the bench in 1978, she had a pretty steep learning curve to learn about new areas in the civil and criminal law that she was just unfamiliar with. In the law, we rely on tradition and precedent, but we live in unprecedented times. But I believe we can learn, adapt, and that innovation is not the enemy of tradition. Having worked on well over 1,000 jury trials, I believe our jury system is one of the most unique and elegant designs of our democracy. The ability of citizens from a wide range of political, racial, cultural, educational, and socioeconomic realities to come together, listen to evidence, apply law, and work together to resolve claims and disputes is at times complicated, messy, slow, but also quite extraordinary and very much needed right now. Clarence Darrow once said, "Justice has nothing to do with what goes on in a courtroom. Justice is what comes out of a courtroom." I believe that our justice system is more than a location. Justice lives in that dynamic tension of two parties telling two stories and looking for one truth. It lives in the zeal and the passion of advocates fighting for their clients. It lives in the critical analysis of evidence and collaborative deliberation by a group of jurors or a single judge. It lives in their judgment. We live in extremely challenging times, but I believe our work in maintaining our justice system is critical in helping to solve the many problems we have as a society. Thank all of you for being here today and for helping us help to solve those problems. I want to now turn this over to Ken Broda-Bain, who will be moderating the first panel.
Thank you very much, Richard. The focus of this conference, as Richard just laid out, is on the online courtroom and the goal of moving all or parts of our legal process from the physical courtroom space to an online space. But one question in asking how effective that move is and can be, one question in asking how high the quality of the communication can be in that setting, is the question, compared to what? And because if it's compared to a normal times pre-pandemic courtroom, I think you're going to have one answer. But if it is compared to the mid-pandemic, or even presently, unfortunately, the rising pandemic courtroom, then you're going to have another answer. And so for this reason, this conference is beginning with a discussion focusing on how courts have been adapting to in-person trials during the pandemic. My name is Ken Broda-Bain. I'm a litigation consultant with Persuasion Strategies, a service of Holland & Hart based in Denver. And the three panelists to discuss this question on the in-person court today, and she's, I just noticed that she is here. Yes, the Honorable Carrie Meyer, Assistant Chief Judge in Hennepin County. She just joined us from hearings. And she has served Minnesota's 4th Judicial District since 2006. She's been the presiding judge for the criminal division since 2017. She was also an assistant county attorney at Hennepin County Attorney's Office prior to her appointment to the bench. And so we're happy to have Judge Meyer with us. We also have David Slayton. He's the Administrative Director of the Office of Court Administration for the state of Texas. He's also an executive director of the Texas Judicial Council, which is a body statutorily created to study the organization, rules, procedures, and practice results, and the uniformity and the discretionary powers of the state courts and methods for their improvement. So this is definitely his bailiwick. He's also the past president of the National Association for Court Management. And the third panelist we have today is Mr. Corey Buland. He is a partner at Sussman Godfrey, LLP, practicing in their New York office since 2012, after clerking for the U.S. Court of Appeals and the USDC Southern District of New York. He represents clients in breach of contract, fraud, class action, consumer protection, false claims, regulatory, and other complex business disputes. He has recent experience with in-person litigation during the pandemic. And so we'll be talking with all of these individuals on just what courts are doing and more importantly, what are the effects of that in restarting in-person trials. Now, it's safe to say that the prospect of jury trials in U.S. and state courts around the country is in a state of flux, with some being open, some being closed, some being close to normal, some being operated in a highly restrictive fashion, using only a limited number of larger courtrooms or even alternate venues. Now, among those that are open, there's also a fair amount of variety, with judges differing in their views and level of concern, just like the rest of the population. There are a number of resources listing the precautions that courts have taken, and I've included those resources at the tab, I believe at the bottom of your screen on resources, and those will be available. So rather than our focus really, rather than reiterating that list and rather than just going through what courts should do, what we would like to do in the 45 minutes or so that remain is have a conversation about the effects of these precautions on the trial process. And importantly, some of the trade-offs that occur when we attempt communication in that setting, particularly those trade-offs that bear on effective advocacy in this in-person mid-pandemic setting. As Richard mentioned at the start, there's also a Q&A button at the bottom, and we will generally monitor those questions as time permits. We'd love to get to them, but of course, as Richard warned, we may not get to all. So with that, I would like to kick off the discussion with a general question, first to Mr. Slayton and then to Judge Meyer, on just in your experience in the way courts are adapting to in-person trials during the pandemic, what to you stands out the most? We can start with Mr. Slayton.
Sure. I think good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, wherever you may be. It's good to be with you. Thank you very much, Richard, and for that inspiring introduction this afternoon. I think one of the things that's most telling about in-person jury trials in our state now is just how different they are. People may be expecting to see trial courtrooms who look maybe similar to what they are. Maybe they're thinking, well, just a little plexiglass here and there, or things will make things fairly normal. And we in our state have, throughout the summer, our office worked with judges to try 50 jury trials, 45 to verdict. And there's been some since then that we've continued to assist with. And what I will tell you is that none of the trials are what you would think. We've seen virtually in our state, there's no courthouses that are large enough to be able to seat a veneer panel large enough to seat a jury. So they've been moving to gymnasiums, and you'll see a video later that shows you kind of some of the things that we've been doing. Parties moved all over the courtroom. So maybe the witness stand is now the court reporter box, and maybe the jury box is now the witness stand, and the jurors are in the gallery of the courtroom, and maybe even the counsel tables are now facing to the back of the courtroom versus the front. So definitely, I think the biggest thing, Ken, is that it just looks really different. Of course, masking and social distancing and all those things that you would think come into play. That is what today's in-person jury trial looks like.
Now, let me do a quick follow-up. You mentioned the differences either within courtrooms or between courtroom systems. Is that difference, is that a strength or is that a problem?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on who you ask. I mean, what we've seen is the ability that we can do jury trials in person. It is really difficult. I'll just say that. Obviously, trying to get a cross-section of veneer to show up has always been something very important to us. And I think, courts have done a remarkably good job throughout the pandemic, in my perspective. Judges have. And one of the things that judges have had to really think about, and I'm sure the judge can speak more to this, is making sure that even through all these changes that we maintain a fair trial where people can still feel like they're getting that trial. So for instance, just to give you an example, when the jury is in the back of the courtroom in the gallery, can they still see the evidence that maybe typically would have been presented on a screen at the front of the courtroom near the jury box? So courts have had to take a close look at that and really try to make sure they take steps to make it fair. I don't know that I would say it's made it worse. It certainly has changed it a lot, and I think many attorneys and judges looking at it say this is not the preferable way of doing this, and it's caused a lot of issues from that perspective. And of course, now in our state, and I think many other states, with the increasing numbers from the pandemic, many of those in-person jury trials are being canceled because of it's just not safe enough to bring people together. So, but I think generally people would probably look at it as a negative. It can occur, but it's very difficult and definitely changes things up.
Got it. Judge Meyer, can I ask you, what to you stands out the most from the bench in your experience with the ways courts are adapting to in-person trials?
Well, I agree with David. A lot of the same issues are the things that we had to tackle in Minnesota. How to bring a jury panel in, right? We used to bring 125 people in every Monday morning and get ready to pull veneers out of that pool. And there is no way we are fitting 125 people in any room in the courthouse at this time. We changed completely the way we pick juries. We do not even bring a whole panel together into a courtroom. We have gone through and we created a jury questionnaire that we give to all potential jurors, and they fill those out. And we just bring in groups of 14 and strike as we go, because that's the only way to safely get to 14 eventually. But instead of having 24, 30, or 35 or 50 people in the courtroom, we are just having 14 at a time and making decisions based on what they wrote on their questionnaires. The other major change was our courtrooms themselves, as David alluded to. But we have chosen in Minneapolis to stay in our courtrooms. We have over 50 courtrooms, but we're only using 5 for jury trials because of the square footage. And I actually have floor plans. I don't know if you're ready for me to show those, of how we changed our biggest courtrooms to accommodate trials in the COVID era. Here you go. So we have 5 courtrooms that are over 1,900 square feet. We used to try our trials in 1,400 square foot courtrooms almost exclusively, but now we will not use anything smaller than 1,900 square feet. You can sort of see, if your screen's big enough, this slide. This is how our courtrooms were set up. At the top of the screen is the public hallway and the main entrance to the courtroom. Those chairs on both sides of that door in the middle are the gallery seats, and then of course the bar. The jury sat to the left-hand side in those 12 chairs, plus we'd fit our alternates on the floor. The counsel tables faced the judge and were sort of perpendicular to the jury. And of course the judge, court reporter, and witness just sat one in a row. Well, there's no way to do that. There's not 6 feet between those 12 chairs. They are shoulder to shoulder. And so we really had to think about our courtroom differently, as David said they did in Texas as well. And the next slide shows us that we sort of turned everything 90 degrees. Got that? There we go. And so our counsel tables face the jury box, but the jury box, so there's these little red clouds that show where people sit now, and the jurors are the entire left side of the courtroom. There's only 2 in the old jury box because we are keeping more than 6 feet between everyone. And so we're sitting 8 in front of the bar and 6 behind the bar in the gallery seating. And the spectators come and sit on the right-hand side of the gallery seating, 5 or 6 people. And the attorneys face the jury instead of the judge. The court reporter, we moved her to the floor in front of the witness and in front of the jury. And then the witness stayed in the witness stand. But we have more than a little bit of plexiglass. There's an acrylic boom in my county based on our courthouse alone, as we're all sort of in our own individual Popemobiles, talking to the jury and the witnesses. So this is what we're doing in 4 of our courtrooms right now, what's on the screen. But we decided we'd go even farther because you might have heard we have some big trials coming up and we expect we'll need more than 3 counsel tables. So we took one of our courtrooms, in fact, this floor plan, pretty much to the studs, and took out all the seating. So that's the next screen here. And we've made it so that we've set up, instead of sort of moving around the seats and the risers for the jury, we took it all down and we have just set up chairs and desks for our jurors on that same side of the courtroom. And we can get up to 6 counsel tables. There's very little room for spectators, but we are doing some closed circuit TV to another courtroom for people to be able to, for the public to be able to watch our trials while they're happening and still give us social distancing. The other thing we changed is at the end of the trial, the jury does not deliberate in the little jury room, which, you know, we all know is intentionally small so that they feel some pressure to reach a verdict. They are in one of the 1,400 square feet courtrooms to deliberate so that they have adequate space.
Great, thank you, Judge. Now, with all this reconfiguration, I'm curious about what the view from the counsel table is. So I thought I'd ask Mr. Buland, based on your experience as an advocate at trying the case, how does this change the way you argue a case, if it does?
Well, it's funny you asked that, Ken. Hearing Judge Meyer and David talk about all the physical changes, in the case I tried, the physical layout of the courtroom actually didn't change. There was just a huge amount of plexiglass added. But despite the physical layout changing, the trial was dramatically different. And I think it's important to note that the physical layout of the courtroom where I tried a case stayed the same, and others have changed dramatically. So I think the first thing I would recommend any lawyer facing a COVID trial to do is figure out exactly what physical space you're going to be in and what procedural changes the court and the judge have adopted, because it could affect your experience very differently than another lawyer in the COVID era. As for our trial, despite the physical layout being the same, COVID affected pretty much everything we did. It was an 8-day jury trial in federal court in Kentucky. And COVID affects your ability, not just in the courtroom, but before you get there. Lining up witnesses who will voluntarily testify is very different. It's hard enough to get third-party witnesses to show up at a trial usually. Trying to do it in the age of a pandemic is even harder. Getting your staff and your technical assistants to come to a trial and make them feel safe and comfortable is something that takes a lot of planning and a little bit extra expense. Figuring out how you're going to work with your colleagues. Usually at trial, I'm in a war room with my partners and associates, and we work closely. And that's kind of part of, I think, the great fun of trial and how you put on a good case. You can't do that. You can't be shoulder to shoulder with your colleagues, so you have to figure out how you make the space work and still get that teamwork that you need to successfully try a case. And then when you get into the courtroom, I think the biggest difference is not being able to see the faces of the judge and the jury. In our trial, the witness was able to take their mask off on the stand, which I think is essential. But as a trial lawyer, not being able to see the jury's face when you're talking to them, we were still maybe 10 feet from the jury looking right at them. But it's very difficult to see how they're reacting to you with the witness with masks on. So I think all those things require a lot of thought when you're going into a trial.
Thank you. And I definitely want to come back and discuss a little bit more just kind of the unique effect of the covered face when we're persuading and advocating. But I wanted to jump first to, there's a video, Mr. Slayton, that you directed us to, created by Texas courts, that I think will help us get a flavor of how courts are adapting and what some of these courtrooms look like. But while I cue that up, I wonder if you could give us kind of tell us a little bit about this video before I cue it up.
Sure. One of the things that we get asked most often is, what does a jury trial in Texas during the pandemic look like? And so we sent our video crew out to a number of locations around the state that were doing jury trials during the late summer. And basically we have produced this video, which, Ken, if you want to push play on, it'll start here in a second, but it's about 5 minutes long. I think it'll give you a good feeling for what the trials are like. So hopefully you can enjoy this.
Well, the first one I tried was in the New Boston High School auditorium. And so it was best described by a friend of mine who's also a lawyer who saw the photograph. He said it looked like a high school production of To Kill a Mockingbird.
I kept pushing it and thinking, well, we're going to be able to have them soon. And I was having ideas in my head of how I would do it. And so finally probably, I think it was the 1st of August, or it's middle of July when I applied to have it.
We had a ton of planning that went into it, probably 30, 40 hours of working through the logistics of where we were going to do it, trying to find a location, make sure that we had all the health authority on board.
Go to the breakout room button, put join. I've been a litigator, a prosecutor, and then judge, and I never thought that I would ever experience a virtual trial in my career.
We're picking it at our convention center here in the city of Longview, and we've been planning this since mid-June. Making sure everything's set up, getting the juror summonses to be, address everything, working with the Sheriff's Department for security, the logistics.
How you're going to make social distancing, how you're going to make sure everybody stays safe, what kind of, plexiglass are you going to put up, how are you going to do the cleaning in your courtrooms.
We had to bring in basically folding tables and folding chairs to put in the defense over here, the prosecution over here. I had to move my court reporters instead of being beside me. They had to be out in front of me.
How do we make sure that the jury has adequate technology? How do we make sure that the jury knows that this isn't a hoax and that they know what link to click? We needed to make sure that how did the attorneys introduce evidence correctly? How do we do voir dire? How do we make sure that we take breaks?
Yeah, where's everybody going to sit? What are we going to do if they have to go to the bathroom? How do we dismiss people? What if there's a jury shuffle? Everything. You wake up in the middle of the night and I write it down. Oh, here's the question. I text my court administrator, one more thing to think about. And I get, please don't text me at 11 p.m. again. So it was literally a team effort.
I think most courts will find that once they get through the first trial or two, they've seen the logistics, they've figured out what they have to do to make this work. They can make it work, and you can get a new jury, you can get a new trial, you can move your dockets along.
I got a comment after jury selection, an email right afterwards, where one of the veneer members who wasn't selected said, "Thank you for making us all feel safe. This is a weird time to do a jury trial. We appreciated some of the normalcy, and I felt safe, and I'd do it again." It's worth it to show that we're trying cases, to show that we're working hard. It was a lot of hard work, but it's worth it.
I just encourage everybody to just be creative and keep going. I mean, we're going to be in this till 2021 or whenever, and I'm just doing what they elected me to do, so I get busy.
I would say that it's our job to keep the wheels of justice turning. Now, even though the wheels may be slower than what we were used to during this pandemic, it's important for us as judges to try to find innovative ways to continue to provide access to justice and for parties to litigate their disputes peacefully. And I think just because it's new isn't a reason for us to shy away from something. And I think that as judges and as public servants, we should invite new challenges and experiences.
People can choose to go to the grocery store or go someplace on their own. When we summon them to the courthouse, I think it puts added pressure and responsibility on all of us. I think the judiciary as a whole has tried to be very, very cognizant of that. I think you look at the trials that have happened and the precautions they took, but also to make sure that we're getting a good, array of our communities to show up. And I think we did that today.
Okay, yeah, I cut the credits short there a bit, but Mr. Slayton, is there anything that you would kind of call out from that?
Sure. I think a couple of things, and I know there's been some questions. So we've tried in those, that sort of highlights some of the trials. Those are both criminal and civil jury trials that have been tried. And we've been seeing that really across our state, both civil and criminal. We have seen the folks showing up for jury duty. We've seen lower turnout among just overall. We haven't seen a significant shift in the makeup of the veneer, but it certainly is something that is concerning. We've got some poll data that we did in Texas, which show that groups are less likely to appear than others due to concerns. And so obviously that's been a concern of ours. And then, of course, I know there was a question to this is, addressing the concerns of lawyers and witnesses and litigants. We've had to work really closely with all of those folks to think about people who are vulnerable and how appearing during the pandemic could put them at risk. As was mentioned in the Q&A, we have seen as late as yesterday several trials that have had to result in mistrial because of COVID exposure in the courtroom. There was a case in federal court just yesterday that was mistried because of a juror testing positive for COVID. We've had defendants in criminal cases testing positive. We've had, witnesses and others. So it is definitely makes for challenging times. But I think one thing that's worth noting from the video, probably the key thing I would say is, we get, especially when you're thinking about virtual jury trials, everybody always says, I don't know, y'all will be talking about that. Everybody says, well, I'm not sure I can judge the credibility of the jurors or the witnesses or whatever. And I would just have you watch that video again, maybe, and look at how far away the jurors are from the counsel tables, how far away the jurors are. There's no approaching, the witnesses are. There's no approaching the witness anymore. And so, in some of those courtrooms, 75 to 100 feet away is where the last juror is from the counsel table. So, and probably wearing a mask. You saw the shields that are being used. In fact, you see it on the slide here. We are allowing them when they're speaking to remove their face mask and then put it back on. But they do have a shield on at all times, witnesses as well. So anyway, that's, to me, one of the key things is just this, in those large rooms when you have that, obviously to get everybody 6 feet apart, it just takes a lot of space and spread out over a large distance.
That's an interesting point, because I think, you obviously had a very high quality video team and they're able to kind of get close and show us all these things. But in the actual courtroom, you're really not that close. And that in itself, in addition to the mask, is a kind of barrier. One other thing I found interesting about that video is they also covered both virtual and in person, kind of treating the virtual options as one tool in the toolbox. But I wanted to kind of loop back to the communication effects of kind of what we saw as far as the adaptations. And one commenter on our pre-conference survey, talking about the social distancing that you just mentioned, it required an in-person jury trial, said that these kind of measures rob the proceeding of their resonance, was the quotation. Another respondent wrote, the process is robbed of dignity and conveys a sterile, uninspiring message to jurors. I'm wondering what each of your reactions are. And maybe we start kind of with you as the advocate, Mr. Buland. Just what is your reaction to the idea that something is being lost in that, or that feeling from that one commenter?
I don't know that the solemnity or the legitimacy or anything like that of the proceedings was lost, but I do think that as an advocate, you definitely lose part of the connection you form with both the judge and the jury. Fortunately, we could still see the witness; their mask was off, but you can't connect with the jury as well when you can't see their facial expressions and they can't see yours. I'm a big believer in the fact that communication is conveyed a lot by people's facial expressions, and to not see that is a big loss. I don't think I could try a case where the witness's face was covered, and it was a big loss not to be able to see the judge or the jury, to know exactly what they were thinking, or at least have a better idea.
How about you, Judge Meyer? Do you think that anything is lost from the process with these procedures and precautions?
Well, as you saw, we've chosen not to go into a great big auditorium and have everyone there, because you certainly would lose it there. We are questioning our jurors one by one on the witness stand, where they are allowed to remove their masks. And in fact, they're asked to remove their masks, because we know we judge people by their facial expressions, right? We convey a lot of information through our facial expressions. And the same with our witnesses. Of course, we disinfect between everyone and have hand sanitizer, and their masks are on and off as they get on and off the witness stand. But we all have decided that the facial expressions are important to the attorneys, especially. They've all asked for witnesses to have their masks off, and jurors as well, while they're being questioned. I think putting them in a great big gymnasium would be darn near impossible to try to figure out what the juror in the back row is saying. And again, we chose to go with written questionnaires that cover a lot of territory instead of having the whole group in the room answering raise your hand questions.
Okay, thank you. Now, there is some social science research showing that there's little, if any, evidence that masks hinder actual truthfulness determinations, that when witnesses are masked, sometimes the ability of another to determine the truthfulness of what is being said is actually enhanced because they're focused less on facial expression and more on more reliable elements that are content related. But what I'm hearing from you, Judge Myers, and you, Mr. Buland, is that there are other dimensions of communication. There's kind of that feeling of connection. There's a feeling that you're talking to a person that perhaps is lost with facial coverings. Is that something you'd agree with?
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's just how we communicate as humans.
Okay. Any other thoughts on masks in particular, Mr. Slayton or Mr. Buland?
I would just add, since there have been some questions about it, you've seen this video, the use of shields, and I think many courts are using a combination of masks and shields. The public health authorities would say we always be wearing a mask without exception, never take it off in the room because of the aerosolization of the virus. But we've basically worked with them to allow people to remove their mask while they're speaking, as long as they have a shield on and are immobile. But virtually the rest of the time, their masks are on, and they're required to be on for everyone in the courtroom unless they are speaking at the time. So they can pull it down, answer the question, put it back on. That's basically how we're handling the issue. But even a witness in the witness stand, they are generally required to remove their mask as long as they have a shield, but they have to be wearing a shield to be able to do that first.
Right. And it seems like the more we learn about kind of aerosolation of the virus, the kind of the less confident people are becoming in shields as opposed to masks. But one thing I want to make sure that we don't neglect is just the question of what is the effect of this on the composition of the jury. And I want to share one other quote. Jeff Ward is the president of the Georgia Defense Lawyers Association, and he said, he was quoted in the press recently saying, if someone says they're terrified of getting sick by virtue of being in a courtroom, then I don't know how you keep them there. I certainly don't want anyone in that jury box who's terrified to be there because they're not going to be listening to anything that is being presented to them. And I certainly think the court is going to have to consider releasing that juror for cause. And so my question is, knowing that these precautions are reducing risk and not eliminating it, when the juror says, I am uncomfortable, when the juror says, I am distracted, what does the court do? And how does the court do that without kind of skewing the representativeness of the jury? I suppose perhaps that one should first go to Judge Meyer. He's up in your call.
Yeah. We try to prevent getting people that far into the process before we find out that they're terrified of, that they have serious health concerns about COVID. We have a very liberal deferral process, or whatever. We allow people to defer up to, it used to be 6 months without any reason, and now it's a full year. And we're letting people defer for a second time, which we've never done before because of concerns, their personal concerns about COVID. If someone gets all the way through, they've shown up for jury service and they're on the panel and they're being questioned by the attorneys, and they tell us why they cannot, why they do not feel safe, even after they see the setup. And I've had lots of people say, I was real nervous before I got in this courtroom, but I see what you're doing and I feel better and I'm going to be able to pay attention. But for the folks who still are just like, you know what, I take care, I want to be able to see my elderly parents and I won't be able to if I have to be here. We then defer them from the courtroom. As far as our representation, we watch that very carefully. It's a big part of why we're still doing things in person. That was one of the questions we got, why we don't do virtual voir dire. We do not want our economically, the people who don't have technology in their homes to be excluded from jury service. And if they're going to be down here, they might as well be in the room with us, right? So we're working really hard to make sure we're still getting a good representation of our county, which is very diverse county economically. We have metro, suburban, and rural part of our county, and our numbers have stayed really good as far as representation.
Thank you. Mr. Slayton, Mr. Bueland, any thoughts on whether in-person courtrooms with that kind of hardship excusal is a threat to representative jurors, or not so much?
I would definitely say I think it's a threat that we have to watch. We have polling data. There was polling data done in June for the entire country, as well as an oversample of Texas specific. And the data shows us that there are certain groups who are more concerned and unwilling to come to the courthouse for jury duty than others. And those groups fall into basically people who are more liberal on the political scale, people who are caretakers, African Americans in particular. And so those are the three main groups that I remember from the poll. And so we've been really worried about that and been trying to watch the representativeness of the folks showing up just to make sure that we've not seen an impact. But we're just like the judge mentioned, we're doing the same thing in Texas, liberal excusal or deferral. In fact, when we send out the summons, the courts are required to send out what we call the COVID questionnaire. It asks about symptoms or exposure, but it also asks about their level of discomfort. And if they express any level of discomfort, they're being excused or deferred. So that's obviously impacting the number of people showing up, but at least so far, initial indicators are it's not affecting the representativeness of the panels. I just want to say, I know this panel is not about virtual jury trials, but just to follow up to what Judge Meyer said, in Texas, we are doing virtual jury trials, and to deal with those, we have 4 next week, as a matter of fact, and to deal with those individuals who don't have access to technology because of whatever reason, for whatever reason they don't, we're actually delivering to their home devices that are connected to the internet through cell service, and they're participating that way. And it's worked really well for us. But, we're trying to use every option on the table. And I know y'all will have more time to talk about that specifically, but that's been successful for us so far.
And now I want to follow up in a way that maybe broadens what we mean when we say representativeness, because I know, like you mentioned, the polling on who is comfortable and who is less comfortable kind of being in public settings during the pandemic. And there are differences in what we can see, like race and age, disability, and income, some other factors that might be noticeable. But there are also some very profound differences in some things we can't see, like attitudes, like you mentioned, liberalism and conservatism. That's a huge gulf in terms of comfort with public places or not. And in addition, attitudes toward personal responsibility, attitudes toward acceptable risk, the kinds of attitudes that would make a difference in both civil and as well as criminal cases. And so is there any concern that by kind of having an opt-out for people to say, if you're concerned, then you're not going to be required to go to jury duty, you're also shaping the panel in ways that you can't see, to be more receptive to some arguments and less receptive to others?
As a trial lawyer, that's been our biggest concern about having in-person civil jury trials. We're not as concerned about the things you can see the differences. We're more concerned about the personality differences that you just mentioned, Ken. And we've been trying to find reliable information about whether the fear of COVID, the legitimate fear of COVID, is skewing those jury panels. I was interested to hear about the poll David just mentioned, but the data I think is still coming in on that. But it's a major issue and one we're trying to follow closely.
Okay. Now, one other topic I want to make sure that we have time to cover as we're kind of heading into the last 10 minutes is just the possibility for hybridizing this process. Are there parts of the process that might work better online, parts of the process that probably should be in person? And I think we could go a lot of different directions with this question, but let me just start it that way, open-ended. Are there opportunities for hybrid trials?
We're doing that in Texas. We're planning on doing it in Texas, I should say. Dallas County, for instance, in the civil trial side, had planned on doing virtual jury selection and in-person trial because, quite frankly, they don't have the space to bring in a large panel to pick a jury. So they were going to do that virtually, and then and because of the concerns that lawyers were expressing and others, they were going to do the trial in person. The honest truth is that was supposed to go next week and start next week in Dallas County, but the spike in COVID cases has basically canned that whole plan, and they've moved fully virtually. But I think right now the biggest challenge, as Judge Meyer was pointing out, they've had to alter the way they've done jury selection, but the biggest challenge courts across the country are having is picking the jury. Once we get the jury picked, we can make it work in the courtroom. As I said, it looks very different and there are lots of challenges, but if we could figure out a way to pick the jury, I think there are ways to do it in a hybrid way, and that might relieve some of the concerns that have been expressed by especially the bar. I know we did a survey of our bar in Texas in June, and while there was hesitancy, the most willing attorneys were to do the part of the trial they were most willing to do virtually was jury selection. And so I think we could see that become a model that could work, especially if this as this continues to go on for a while.
Thanks. Judge Meyer, how about you?
Sorry. I agree. I could see us being able to do jury selection remotely if we could get equipment to everyone who's been summoned. We have some trials that are bumping along because people live in a different state. And so it would be great our witnesses live in a different state. It would be great to be able to get them to be able to testify remotely for the jury to be able to see. I can see those kind of things going remote, but we have a question in the firm, or a question in the Q&A about from someone who was on a jury in person, and I think he's right. You lose a lot if you try to have your jury, deliberate through the computer. You're going to have people who just remain silent, and it's easier to not participate if you're on a computer screen. So it's intriguing. We have a right to confrontation in our criminal cases, and that's been an issue all along with trying to get people to give up any of their rights. And so that's why we have not done anything remotely yet.
Can I mention one more thing here on the representativeness piece? And I know I don't want to be jumping ahead too much, but we have seen actually more representativeness of jury panels done virtually than in person. Number one, the appearance rate has gone up. We actually did a pretty deep dive on a jury panel that appeared in San Antonio in Bexar County. And it was really interesting to see that there was more. I think everybody's quick to compare virtual things to some perfect thing that existed before, which we know did not exist. There's always been imperfections in our system. And what we've seen is that is something that has increased participation, especially in the communities that were less likely to participate before because of economic barriers or transportation or childcare or whatever it may be. And so that's something I think we need to watch and think about how we might be able to use that in the future to increase representativeness if we chose to do that.
In non-representativeness, I'm curious how you address the technical access issues for the online portions of the trial.
Right. So what we've done in Texas is we are just literally delivering to their homes devices that connect. They're locked down, but they're basically, in most instances, iPads with cell service. They're locked down where the only thing that is on it able to be used is Zoom, which is what we're using in our state, as well as a Dropbox to view the exhibits. That's pretty much it. They can't, and that was locked down to try to prohibit them from doing other research. They obviously have cameras, so we can watch them the whole time. They've been totally engaged in all the trials that we've watched and done. And like I said, next week there's 4. You can go watch them for yourself. There's a link you can go to, streams.txcourts.gov, and you can watch all the courts live next week. But you can see for yourself how you feel about it. But that's how we've dealt with the barrier we ask folks as part of the jury summons questioning process. Do you have the device? Do you have a private room? And we're either delivering them a device, or if they don't have a private place, they can appear at the courthouse into a Zoom room where they are able to participate remotely from the courthouse. But everyone, witnesses, attorneys, everyone.
Great. Now, how about you, Mr. Buland, on the hybridization point? In your recent trial, are there parts that could have or should have been better online, or parts that maybe you don't imagine how it could have been done online?
Well, I think voir dire could have been done online, but it worked just fine in the courtroom. It was a jury selection process that was where the attorneys had less involvement than in others. I mean, we all know how drastically different jury selection can be in different courtrooms and before different judges. When it's one where the court generally handles the jury selection with limited input from the lawyers, I think that can be done online. The more interactive ones, I think that would be hard. I think the most important thing that attorneys need to make sure there's the opportunity to have hybrid is witnesses to appear. There's fact witnesses who may be immunocompromised, who may be elderly, who may live a long way away. A lot of great experts are elderly, and they may not feel comfortable traveling after you've invested $100,000 in getting them ready for trial. So you really have to make sure that option's available. I think it's fair, and I think it works very well. I think having a witness appear remotely, get big TVs in there, works just fine. I tend to agree with what's been said about jury deliberations. I think Judge Meyer would have a better view on that, but I do find it difficult to see how the jury deliberation process couldn't be drastically altered if that was remote.
Gotcha. Now, speaking of the jury and their ability to kind of communicate and interact, I think one other factor that I haven't seen mentioned a lot, but I have seen mentioned a few times, is just the jury's ability to have informal, kind of relaxed communication, their opportunity to get to know each other. In normal times during the courtroom, they're waiting in the jury room and they're chatting among themselves. In present distance courtrooms, they're separated, they're in different places, they're probably not as likely to chat. And then, of course, in an online setting, they don't necessarily have a place where they can chat. But I wonder if any of you want to speak to that, kind of the jurors bonding, and whether that is threatened by either of these options in the present situation.
Sure, I can tell you I've picked 11 juries since June 1st, and I've talked with them about this. The ones who end up going to verdict, I've talked with them specifically about this issue. And most of them have said they didn't bond during the trial at all, even though we have another courtroom for them to meet in. But we also are providing a lot of different spaces so that they're not feeling cramped. And they really are waiting until deliberations to start bonding. And our deliberations are taking a little bit longer than they did before as a result of that. But we are not having a spike in mistrials or hung juries. So I agree. I think that it's happening later, especially because they do not have, for us, that universal jury selection where they get to learn a little bit about each other, because they're not all in the room at once while we're doing jury selection.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're saying the same thing, Ken. It appears, whether it's in person or virtual, there appears to be less bonding. I mean, let's be clear, jurors would bring meals to eat for each other before to the jury rooms. They would, sit around and talk, and it's just not possible. It just doesn't seem to be happening the same way.
Okay, thanks. Now we have a couple of minutes left, I think literally 2, and we got a lot of questions I'm just noticing. I'm gonna hit a couple of them. One question is just how sidebar is handled during the in-person trials. Anyone speak to that?
I will say,
Yeah.
I would be curious how Judge Meyer handles them, because in the trial I did, it did not work well. We were supposed to bring our own headsets and microphones and plug them in at counsel table. And that was too loud, the jury could hear us. And so we were supposed to go plug it in at the bench and then use our headsets. And then we were on top of the other counsel, and there was interference, and it was just kind of a mess. So I'd be curious to know how it's done in Hennepin County.
So over on the corner of our Next to the bench, there's actually a space that is big enough for 2 attorneys and a judge to have conversations 6 feet apart, and we put on the white noise. We can't make a record that way, so we are ordering headsets. We're not going to make you bring your own, that will plug in, and we tried them with just defense counsel during jury selection, being able to talk with each other and their client, and now we're going to add in the prosecution and judge, not during jury selection, but for sidebar, and the court reporter will be able to listen only. And so we're hoping that that is going to work, but I appreciate that there will be problems with the jury being able to overhear. And so the white noise hopefully will help with that, but it's a real issue, right? You can't cram a whole bunch of people whispering in each other's ears right now.
Great. Well, we have final words. Any final words from you on the panel? I think what would be the top takeaway for court administrators or for advocates or for judges looking to learn from the early experience of in-person trials? Last words.
My number one takeaway would be to learn exactly what your judge and court are doing, because it varies so greatly. And that'll inform how you prepare and whether you're willing to do it.
Good call.
I would just add that I think my number one takeaway is realize that this is likely to be going on for a while. And when the courts get to the end of this, there's likely to be a significantly huge backlog of jury trials. We expect to have more than 1 year's worth of jury trials and backlog by the time we get to the end of this. And so, the key is, I think, keep an open mind and think about all possible options for your jury trial, whether that's in person or virtual or some hybrid. I think it's really important to keep an open mind about that, because it may be the only way you and your clients get to go to trial in the near future.
Thanks. And Judge Meyer, last word.
Great. I think it's really consider whether you need a jury to decide your case. Or whether your judge can do it, and to reduce the number of if you're not comfortable with the types of people you think are going to respond to jury summons right now, then maybe you don't really need a jury, or maybe you don't need your trial right now. But those backlogs are starting to weigh on all of us. We know they have to happen, but for us, we started with in custody felony cases for trial first, because those folks have constitutional right to a speedy trial, and we needed to get them their trials. And so I think just really think about, if you are doing it in person, is that what is best for your client?
Well, thank you all so much for your conversation. I think the wealth of questions that we did not get to just speaks to the complexity of the task and the fact that we're still all working on this. But with that, I'm going to thank all of you and all of the audience and hand things back to Charlie.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Panel 1, for all of that great practical tips that you gave us for dealing with in-person trials during the pandemic. And we are now going to move to Panel 2. Before we do that, in case we have new people that are joining us for this panel, just to let you know that you can customize the placement of the widgets on your screen and use the maximize buttons to make the boxes bigger if you prefer. Please also send in questions, as you've been doing, using the purple Q&A widget, and do join the discussion on LinkedIn. The widget is below on your screen. So it's now time for Panel 2, which is called Practical Tips for Hybrid and Online Trials. And the moderator for this panel is the Honourable Mark Drummond, the Executive Judicial Director for the Civil Jury Project at NYU School of Law, and Anita faculty member. Today he's streaming live to us from New York. Thank you for leading this panel. Judge Drummond, it's over to you.
Thank you, Charlie, and welcome everyone to Panel 2, Practical Tips for Hybrid and Online Trials. And let's first define hybrid. By hybrid, we mean it is a mixture of both in-person and online trials. So before I introduce the panelists, I want you to know that they have covered the waterfront when it comes to hybrid trials. And the thing that impressed me the most when I learned the credentials of our panelists was that it reminded me of the entrepreneur T. Boone Pickens, who said one of the greatest attributes of a leader is the ability to make a decision. And instead of ready, aim, 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 and never getting to fire, he said the great leaders ready, aim, fire. So all of your panelists today have done that. And let me introduce them. We have Judge Lee, who started a 55-day online trial, first doing in-person voir dire, followed by an online trial. Then we have Corinne Wilson, who had perhaps the most abrupt pivot between the in-person world and the online world when the courthouse lights were literally turned off. The pandemic hit. She was in the middle of a trial. At her urging, the court then went to online. Ken Friedman has done a complete online trial, and he will talk about the reasons why he wanted to go online, the objection to that, and how the judge ruled. And we have Judge Matt Williams. And Judge Matt Williams has done both online and in-person hybrid trials and has been a leader in the state of Washington in their pivot to the online world. So if you have any questions, you can go down to the questions tab and type those in, and all of us will be monitoring them to see who would be best to address them, and we hope we can get to your questions. And when our panel met, we talked about all of their experience, but we boiled it down to the top 3 takeaways, and they are preparation. Preparation, first of all, with the platform, to find out which platform the court is using, then to go on the platform and get familiar with it, know how to use the annotation tools. In addition, I popped open my laptop this morning and I see that Zoom 5.0 is now available. So I will have to go on and see what the changes are in Zoom. And all of the platforms have been doing innovations. At the Civil Jury Project, we sent a letter to Zoom asking if they could do a fix so that we could arrange the tiles so that the tiles don't move around, that we could get a jury box and the jurors wouldn't move around. They would stay in the same order. Actually, the 17th Circuit in Florida was ahead of us on this and worked with Zoom to get that fix installed. So the platforms are changing, sometimes on almost a weekly basis. Then the preparation in terms of finding out if the court has any protocols, because courts around the country are coming out with protocols on a weekly basis with regard to the hybrid and the online world. In addition, you'll want to know what the court has available to it. Is it a single monitor? Is it a dual monitor? And finally, throughout this whole webinar, you will learn how to present yourself professionally. So you sound professional and you also look professional. But that also has to extend to the client. It does no good if you do all the preparation on your end and don't do the same preparation for the client. The bottom line is you don't want the client to just pop open their laptop ready to testify and sit with their back to a window. Because you know what they're going to look like? They're going to look like they're on 60 Minutes in the Federal Witness Protection Program. So next, the second takeaway is work in progress. It's new for everyone. So we're advocating ready, aim, fire, but it might be ready, aim, fire, aim, fire, aim, fire, but we need to get to fire. And finally, time. The clock matters even more in the hybrid and the online world. So let me tell you that we're going to work backwards with this panel. We wanted to work backwards because we thought this would be the most fascinating way to start with the end result and work backwards to jury selection. The other reason we're doing this is because there will be an entire panel on November 20th with regard to jury selection. So working backwards, we have the jury instructions, monitoring the jury, and what goes back to the jury room. These are our three topics. And I'm going to start with Judge Lee. You did in-person voir dire followed by an online trial, but you did something at the end with regard to your jury foreperson. Tell us what you did and why you decided to go hybrid for jury deliberations.
Yeah, so when we were confronted with dealing with jury deliberations, we were toward the end of the case. There were a couple of issues. Well, there were three issues specifically that came up. And the first, of course, was whether we would continue deliberations totally remote or have people come in person. We actually didn't think about a hybrid at all at that point. It was one or the other. The defense counsel were pushing for having the deliberations in person. So what I did in that regard was I actually surveyed each of the jurors and determined whether or not they would be able to attend in person, what obstacles, if any, they might encounter in that regard. And number two, what would be their preference? And as it turned out, there was only one juror who really was unable to appear in person because he happened to be in LA at the time, and he was attending a trial remotely via LA. Other than he, others could do it, but many preferred not to for various reasons. Some because they were elderly, they were at high risk groups, others because of the commute involved and obligations that they had and so forth. But they were all willing to do so if I ordered it. If I ordered it, they were willing to do so. And then there were a few who actually would prefer to have it in person because they had not met people in person. They thought that would be, preferable. At the end of the day, it was my decision, as I told them, and I decided to remain to have it done remotely. However, when I made that decision, one of the things I was concerned about was how would we be providing, jury instructions to the jurors? How would we provide them their exhibits? How would we provide them their verdict form? And more importantly, how would I get it back? How would I get back that executed, signed verdict form in a timely basis? So one of the other questions I asked the jurors was whether they had the ability to fax, for instance, from home, if they ended up being a foreperson. Or did they, alternatively, not as good an alternative was if they had a smartphone, they could take a photograph, say, of the verdict form, the executed verdict form, and then somehow email it or text it to the court. So we discussed that. But then finally, what it turned out is that the person who ended up being the foreperson chosen by the jurors when they were initially deliberating remotely, indicated that she actually would be able to come to court. It wasn't far from her. She would be willing to do so. And so that actually turned out to be a really excellent result because many of the concerns I had about getting, about the jury being able to communicate to the court during deliberations was really erased at that point. We had a foreperson who was physically able to, we put her in her own room with a laptop, and she was physically able to, email the clerk or even just walk over and knock on the door and say, I've got a question to present to the jury, to present to the court from the jury, or we've come to a verdict and here's the verdict form. So we ended up having all of our jurors deliberate remotely, including the foreperson, because she brought her laptop into court and deliberate with them remotely as if she were at home, but also had the advantage of having her present just in case we needed to have sort of immediate communications with the jury and not have to worry about how we were going to be able to communicate with them. So that all worked out really well. What we did do, though, when we sent in verdict forms and so forth, is we emailed each of the jurors individually with a packet which had the jury instructions, which I read to them, and which had the verdict forms, their own verdict forms, which they could be filling out and keeping track and monitoring their vote. And then also the exhibits were emailed to them individually. And in that regard, we had to do it individually. In other words, we did not do a group email because we did not want them to have emails to share with each other. So that took a little bit of time, and that took a little bit extra time, but it worked out perfectly. It was really very advantageous to have our foreperson in court with us.
Thank you, Judge Lee. Corrine, you had to move 180 degrees from in-person to online. Tell us, did you make any changes for the jury deliberations?
The judge made it clear from the very beginning when he agreed to do the trial, to finish the trial over Zoom, that he was very concerned about maintaining the secrecy of deliberations. And because this was a first, he didn't see how we had the opportunity to create that kind of a structure where the jury deliberations could be kept secret. And so what he did was create safety protocols so that the jury could deliberate in person. So we finished the trial over Zoom, we did instructions over Zoom, but the jury actually came down to the courthouse in person, socially distanced, and deliberated in person, because that is so very important that the deliberations be between the jurors themselves, no one else, and that they're only considering the evidence that's been brought in at court. So they had the exhibit notebook, a complete copy of the exhibit notebook of all admitted exhibits, and they were socially distanced doing deliberations in person for our trial.
Thank you. Ken, you needed to get to a verdict for your client. Tell us why, the opposition to it, and your argument to the court.
Yeah, our client was 86 years old. We had a trial date coming up in September of this year, and we hadn't heard anything from the court. We were in federal court in Seattle, and we asked for a status conference, and we said, you know, Your Honor, we'd love to go on schedule, but if you're not going to, please let us know. And he said, you're not going to go the next 6 to 12 months, maybe longer. So he said you could have a bench trial, we could do that remotely, or maybe even in the courtroom. And we said, no, we'd really like a jury. And he started thinking about it. Maybe we'll do voir dire and then send the jury remotely and bring them back for deliberations. But the more he thought about it, the more he wanted everything to be done remotely. And we ultimately just agreed. Defense objected. They said, you know, technology hurdles are too great. The jury will be distracted. We might not get a representative sample. I mean, all the concerns that we have about remote trials. But the judge finally ordered it over their objection, and it went smoothly.
Great. Judge Williams, you've done both online bench and jury trials. Any comments about deliberations? And if when you get done, please tell us about the state of Washington and pivoting to the hybrid system.
Well, you know, we have 53 Superior Court judges in King County alone, which is the 15th largest court system in the nation. And that means we have 53 different ways of doing things, 53 different ways of skinning the cat. But the great news is that we have all that innovation and energy, and we have a really great relationship with our prosecutors, our defense bar, our civil defense bar, and our plaintiffs' attorneys. And everything we did was fully vetted. A lot of arguments, but you know, we really approached this in the spirit of collaboration. And along the way, we just got started, and we learned as we went. You know, as an example, Ms. Wilson's trial, Corrine's trial, was the very first post-pandemic trial to go, or pandemic trial to go that way. And her judge, who was very concerned about deliberations that could be done via Zoom. Interesting enough, that judge next week will be starting a trial in the box. I'm currently in a trial in the box, which is start to finish. Every single aspect of it will be done via Zoom. And it faces challenges. And the reality is what we found was the more set of eyes on it, the better, the more collaboration, the better. And the reality is you learn stuff as you go along. The important thing is just get started.
All right. Now, Judge Lee was able to monitor her jury because the jury deliberations were in person. I just want to throw out, Ken, how did they monitor the jurors in your case? And then I'm going to go to Judge Williams to ask about how you monitor deliberations.
Yeah, during trial, obviously, we could see the jurors. The court staff was observing them in case we lost one, which happened occasionally. And they could see each other, which I think is important. But once they went to deliberations, the court staff put them in a breakout room and left them there and gave them instructions on how to get the staff's attention if they had a question. And they just relied on the security of the Zoom breakout room as a secure place for them to talk amongst themselves. And the judge talked to them afterwards. They said it took a little while to get to know each other since they hadn't bonded during the trial. They asked that the juror 1, juror 2 name tags got changed to their actual names so they could call each other by name. And the foreperson told us that it went pretty smoothly and everyone had a chance to make their opinions known during deliberations.
All right, Judge Williams, any other comments on monitoring the jury?
Right now, I'm sorry. Right now, of almost, in fact, all of our trials to date, we are literally just starting the deliberations where we're using the Zoom platform. And I will have the first jury that goes to that. Judge Lee, I think, has probably a lot more experience with that. Our current jurors all show up in person, and we have set up, we set aside an entire courtroom for them to use as a socially distanced courtroom. So that is part of our hybrid process. For the online process, again, I think Judge Lee, and we're all drawing from each other's experience. I actually just learned something from Mr. Friedman that I'm going to be putting to the lawyers and the jurors in terms of a way of approaching this. But certainly maintaining that communication with the bailiff is going to be really important so that they can communicate out both questions and having a bit of the ability to do that in a format that can be recorded, but also to be able to let us know when they're on break, to let us know that they are maintaining the confidentiality and security. I think that's going to require some very, very strict instructions, but I would defer to Judge Lee.
Judge Lee?
Yes. So when we decided to go have the deliberations remote, irrespective of our foreperson being in court, I did have to issue a set of additional instructions, about 10 instructions, to remind jurors that they were to conduct themselves as if they were in court, that they were to make sure that they when they were in the room deliberating, that there would be nobody else in the room, that they would not be doing anything else in the room, any other taking care, even taking care of a pet, no pets, and that whenever they took a break, I reminded them that that everybody then had to take a break and they could not discuss the case unless all 12. I mean, it's the same kind of issues you have actually in person, right? And to remind them of that. You just don't have your court attendant perhaps outside the door, who they could contact and waiting for them. But honestly, I mean, inside the deliberation room, we don't know what's going on there, right? We just assume, and I think assume correctly, that they will follow the court's instructions with respect to maintaining their privacy, also not, and breaking when they break, and there may be still some people in the deliberation room, that they do not discuss the case among each other until all 12 are there. So I did give a number of additional instructions in that regard. One of the other things is the exhibits. When we sent over the exhibits, we needed to remind jurors not to be not to be reviewing any of those exhibits and other forms that they were getting, unless they were in deliberations, so that they couldn't do that. And then we just have to trust them in that regard.
And Judge Drummond, if you could just unmute yourself there. I think we may have lost your audio for a moment.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
I am a work in progress. I didn't unmute myself. Corrine, anything that was different in your trial on monitoring the jury?
I want to echo some of what Judge Lee just said. At a certain point, you have to assume that the jurors are taking their oath seriously. There's always a risk at even an in-person trial that two jurors could go out to lunch and talk about the trial during the trial when they know they're not supposed to, or go home after day one of deliberations and discuss the case with their spouse. Those are things that you just can't control unless we want to go back to a system of sequestering the entire jury for the entire trial and tightly controlling it in that way. And I just don't think that's realistic. That's why they're under oath, and that's, you know, what they need to do. And I think in our case, I noticed during the testimony and during closing, a lot of the jurors were wearing headsets. You could tell that they were engaged in what was going on because, while you can't necessarily see the entire room, you can see a lot closer up version of their face than you would in the courtroom. And so you can see a level of engagement that you might not see if somebody's in the jury box with their eyes opened, turned towards you, but totally zoned out, you know, making their grocery list in their head. So it's a trade-off, but I think in our case, you know, the judge was careful to instruct that here's what's expected of you, and it hasn't changed because we're over Zoom, and we expect you to be in the room by yourself, listening to the testimony by yourself, and coming into deliberations, deliberating just in the jury room and just with the jurors. And I appreciate that there are challenges, but I think there are challenges with in-person trials as well.
All right, thank you. Let's move to the actual trial and talk about timing. Timing and time trials, the length of the total day, the length of the sessions, and the breaks. So Ken, let me turn to you first. Any limitations put on the time of the trial by the judge, or any self-imposed limitations you put on yourself?
Yeah, we were mindful that attention spans might be impacted by the fact that we were watching on screens. But the judge did impose, which is not uncommon in federal court, he imposed a time limit on both parties of 15 hours, which neither party really came close to coming up against. He did occasionally encourage us to move along when he thought we had made a point. He encouraged us to strike a few witnesses. The kind of thing you see in a regular courtroom as well. I mean, we did strike 2 witnesses and decide not to call them because we thought we had made our points. You know, they were witnesses from San Diego, and maybe if we had flown them up to Seattle, we might have had enough investment into it that we would have put them on the stand and wasted some time there. So I think we were more efficient. The finances allowed us to make decisions without worrying about the cost. We could keep things moving. So I think the pace was about the same as any other trial of a similar fashion.
Well, when you had 15 hours, do you believe that was the judge, he or she gave you a longer period of time than in person, or a shorter period?
Well, every federal judge is a little different. He proposed 12 and a half hours to each side. We asked for 15. I think we probably used about 12 and a half. I think that's about what he would have imposed in the courtroom.
And your total trial, if I remember, was 8 days, correct?
I think it was more like 5 or 6 days of testimony.
And when did the day start and when did it end?
We went from 9 a.m. to 4:30. The breaks actually were shorter because people didn't have to share restrooms or get in and out of the building. The lunch break was an hour instead of an hour and a half. The morning breaks were 10 minutes, and the afternoon break was 10 minutes. Sidebars were quick and easy. You know, the court staff pushed a button, the jury disappeared. We could talk, push a button, the jury came back. So that was pretty convenient as well.
All right, thank you. Corinne, did timing change when you went from in-person to remote?
Oh, absolutely. I had a hard time with my closing. Not by the time I actually got to do it at trial, but the preparation for it was wildly different than how I prepare for an in-person trial. In-person trial, it's a lot more contemporaneous. I do prepare, but in a different way. when I was giving my closing online, I knew that I did not want to go any longer than 45 minutes. And just to put it into context, we're talking about a 3-plaintiff personal injury case in which the collective demand was $4 million. So I had a lot to cover because there were 3 people, wildly different injuries, and a lot of past and future medical expenses and different injuries. So I had to do it in a shortened time frame, and I put a self-imposed limit of 45 minutes. And the only way that I was able to make that goal was by actually practice. I spent 5 hours practicing my closing, honing it down to make sure that I didn't go over that 45-minute time limit, because I was very concerned that I was going to lose the jury if I did.
Thank you. Judge Lee, you had the longest trial, 55 days. Tell us about timing.
Yeah, so timing is really important from the court standpoint. We have had about 4 or 5 jury trials now that we've been doing totally remotely on the civil side. And the criminal side, by the way, they do it in person. But the timing, well, there are 2 things. One is the nature of the cases. So just to put it in context, the cases that are going to trial, jury trial in our county, Alameda County, California, at this time are only what we call preferential trials. So cases in which we have a plaintiff who is got 6 months estimate to live, and once we grant the preferential trial setting, the case has to be heard within 120 days. That's how much time everybody has to get ready for trial, to do all their discovery and so forth. And typically these cases also involve multiple defendants. So there may be, at the beginning of a case, 20 plus defendants by the time of trial, maybe 5 or 6, and then hopefully you end up with 1 or 2 at the end of the day, which is what happened. But they're complex cases. Even if they're not remote, if they're in person, these cases take typically anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks to complete in terms of from jury selection to verdict form. In our case, and the other thing to remember, and that's why the 55 days is a little misleading. It's because the first day of trial in these types of cases are the pretrial conference, because we don't have time to do it earlier than that, and their discovery is extended into like a week before trial. So we do a pretrial conference, and the pretrial conference can take a couple of weeks. It can take anywhere between a week to 2 weeks, sometimes longer, to get all of that resolved, all the motions in limine and page and line designations and so forth and so on. So this 55-day trial actually was, in terms of actual time, when we started with opening statements and swearing in the jury, opening statements until the verdict, was more along the lines about 30 days, about a month, which actually for these cases is really reasonably short. What happened during the first part of it was pretrial conferences. There was a judge who was assigned, had to recuse himself. There was a gap there because he had to recuse himself. I picked up the case at that point and did the jury selection. And in terms of timing, jury selection in our county remotely take a long time. And it's because of the nature of, and you will have to, every court is different in this regard. You have to understand what the process is for selecting jurors, for bringing in a jury pool and so forth, and how the county works in that regard, and your jury commissioner. And in our case, it requires, it just takes a lot longer. It requires a jury. So we would say, we've told all of our judges who are doing remote cases, you need to add time to your trials. Mostly up front, mostly in the jury selection process, you need to add time. And the other thing I do in my cases, because they are the type they are, and I have a lot of other cases on the calendar. I do Monday through Thursday, 8:30 to 1:30, no lunch, 2 15-minute breaks. That's it. So it's a shorter day. It's a half day, but I actually think in a remote case, in a remote trials, it actually is a better way to go. I don't know if you can hold on to a juror's attention easily all the way through a full day, number one. And number two, you will have more technical issues come up. As the longer you're online, the more likely you're going to have some problem with a technical breakdown where a juror's lost and you have to put them up again. So even though it was 55 days, it was really closer to 30 days in trial, and it was a shortened day. But I think we were actually fairly efficient. After the first day, when we had jury selection issues, jurors were able to get on pretty quickly. They got on early. We started at 8:30. Sometimes in person, you don't even start at 8:30, right? Because you have delays. So I think we did pretty well in that regard.
Yes, and I'm going to turn it over to Judge Williams while I comment on Zoom fatigue is a real thing. So courts are looking at shorter days, starting in the morning but ending around 1:30. Also allowing maybe some of the jurors to have better arrangements for daycare, perhaps get in a half a day of work. So Judge Williams, comments on the length of the total day, length of sessions, and breaks.
And Judge Williams. Yes, Judge Williams, if you could unmute, super.
There we go. So for our in-person trials, which is part of our hybrid process for criminal and some civil trials, the court day is about the same. And the reality is that we need a certain amount of time. So we don't, for those in-person trials, we don't have those kind of half-day sessions that Judge Drummond was talking about. And even on our Zoom trials, we're very aware of the fact that sometimes the jurors may have those child care issues or other issues. We try to take account of that, but the reality is if we have to stop, then that lengthens the total time of the trial. One of the observations that I would have doing a lot of pure Zoom bench trials, as well as now both hybrid and pure Zoom jury trials, is that different parts take different amounts of time when you convert from in-person to video. And the reality is sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's longer. And it doesn't always wash out, but frequently it does. And those technology issues, oh my gosh, I was in the middle of a bench trial just this last, a pure video bench trial, and we had a countywide internet outage. So all of the county systems' internet crashed, but it's a video trial. And so I'm sitting there trying to MacGyver together a solution. I finally wound up tethering a laptop to my cell phone so that we could continue going a trial. This wasn't a problem with the participants. This was a problem within our court-wide and our county-wide system. And sometimes, you're confronted with problems and you have to take the time to resolve them. In terms of Zoom fatigue, I think we're all feeling Zoom fatigue, and we have to be very aware that there is a limit to just how much time jurors can sit and listen to anything in a box. And frankly, there's that same limit when they're live, but it's certainly more prevalent. It's certainly more important for us to take advantage of. One of the things that I do as a judge, and I encourage the lawyers to do this too, because during the trial, you can see the parties. During voir dire, I watch the jurors to make sure that they're paying attention. And during the live trials, it's very easy to use the pin function. You can zoom in and you can make sure that they're following. Now, their eyes aren't going to be on the camera like mine are now. They're going to be down on their screen. But by doing that, you can make sure that your juror is focused and paying attention. And as a judge, I do that. I scan, and if I see somebody that's not paying attention, or if I see sort of a global, everybody's kind of, they just need a break, well, we take a break.
All right. Thank you. Let's move to our next 2 points. We have a question from Pamela coming in, and her question is, how do you show opposing counsel and witness an exhibit without the jury seeing it before the jury is entitled to see it? So let's talk about exhibits and impeachment. And Corrine, any comments on how those were handled in your trial?
Well, that specific issue did not come up in my trial, but I can say that there were some objections made that we didn't necessarily want to hash out in front of the jury. And so it was easy to send the jury to a breakout room while we were dealing with those issues. And I would expect that the same approach would have been used if that did come up, that if there was impeachment material that was going to be used, send the jury to a breakout room, show it with a screen share or via email with opposing counsel, and then bring the jury back in. It's actually pretty easy to do on Zoom using that breakout room feature.
Thank you. Ken, in your trial, once you hit share screen, the cat's out of the bag. Did this come up?
It did. The first time we wanted to use a document for impeachment, actually right before, during a break, we asked the judge how he wanted us to handle that. And I think what Colleen just said would be a good way to do it. But he said, I guess we'll just all look at it together. I think trusting us not to create a mistrial. And so we did it that way. It came in without objection. And we were allowed to show to the witness a document nobody had seen before. So I don't think that's a good solution. Long term, I think it's better to send them to the breakout room, show it, argue about it if necessary, and then show it to the witness. There's probably a way to do it in federal court. There's the preview button and the publish button in the technology, and it's probably going to happen in these platforms as people develop more trial sophistication and how the software should work. But until that does, I think the best practice would be to excuse the jury.
All right. And Judge Lee, in a trial of your length, there had to be a bunch of exhibits. Most of the advice on exhibits is to have them separate so there isn't a lot of scrolling, because scrolling can almost be like you're on a visual roller coaster. How did you handle exhibits?
All right. So there are two issues, which is exhibits that we can be shown to the jury without any issue, and then exhibits for cross-examination and impeachment. So let me just advise folks. I mean, I'm not very technically oriented, but I understand from our lawyers and from other judges who've dealt with this. There is a software program called Veritext, something like along those lines, which is actually designed very well for exhibits in trials. In remote trials. And what it allows the lawyers to do is they load onto Veritext in different folders, apparently, exhibits. And then at the time of trial, the lawyers figure out which, exhibit in which file, and is able to publish it and put it on the shared screen for the court and for the jurors. Where you do not want to have the jurors see in advance, you just don't pull it out in advance, and you ask to go into a breakout room, and we will discuss it. Similarly, if you are a lawyer apparently and you want to suddenly use a document that had not been disclosed before, you have put it in a special file. You let the opposing counsel know, as you would in court, that you're going to be showing this document to the witness. The lawyer has an opportunity to take a look at it, and if there's an objection or there's an issue, we go into a breakout room. And that's how, so we did something similar to that. I don't know if we were using Veritext, but we did something very similar to that in our trials. So for the impeachment documents, the lawyers sent the witnesses, usually they're expert witnesses, actually physical copies of their documents in a sealed envelope. And when the time came for them to cross-examine on that exhibit, they would ask the witness to pull out that envelope I gave you that's sealed. You can now unseal it and pull out X to take a look at such and such document. In the meantime, both counsel and myself had copies of it. And I think they emailed copies to the defense attorney that when the witness was asked about it. So there's a little bit of delay, but not much different than in court. So there's certainly ways to deal with it, but mostly, as counsel was saying, about using breakout rooms to handle all of that worked out fine. We did not have any significant issues in that regard.
Thank you. And Judge Lee, Valerie has asked if you would share your protocols for the jury deliberations, and I believe you are willing to do that, and we will get those posted, correct?
Yes, I can do so.
All right. Judge Williams, any comments about exhibits before we turn to opening and closing?
Yeah, what you've heard is there's basically at least four different ways of skinning a cat. You can pre-admit them. You can get that resolved before trial. You can use the breakout room where you throw the jury into a space. I prefer to use the waiting room because if they're in the breakout room, they can talk to each other and I can admonish them. But sometimes I don't want them talking to each other. You can actually use, which I don't think anybody's mentioned, the Zoom share file function where you can actually have the lawyer transmit a copy of the exhibit to the witness via share file and make a record that that's what they're doing in a certification. It's the same thing as the official court record. And then you can pre-transmit or have it transmitted using email, using a paper version. We have a court system called share file. It's sort of like Dropbox where all the lawyers and the court has access to it. In my court, I don't like paper exhibits. I view them as a vector. And so most of the time, I tell the lawyers, do not be bringing boxes of exhibits into the courthouse. If we're in a live trial, and now in this world, we use share file. They simply upload. We have a naming protocol, and it appears it's actually very easy for the lawyers and for the jurors. Once we have developed the special folder for the jurors of admitted exhibits, for them to access that during deliberations, but also to the extent that we're going to be dealing with something outside the presence of the jury.
All right, we have about 10 minutes left, 10 to 12 minutes left. So let's turn to opening and closing. And I want to turn to the practitioners first. Corinne, you did opening in person and closing remotely. Did your closing change? You talked about that a bit. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say that the major difference was that in doing an online trial, I had initially had this picture in my head. I'm going to do it over Zoom the same way that I would do it in person. And my initial image was, I'm going to be in court. I'm going to get a videographer. They're going to take a video of me in the courtroom giving my closing. That was not realistic. And honestly, it's really not the way to approach this, because where we are right now is we're in a renaissance, whether we like it or not. The way that we litigate is being reinvented, and you can choose to do it the old way and try to present things the old way in a new format. But then you're missing out on all the opportunities that this new format allows. And so when I approached my closing, I fortunately had the tech resources to explore some alternatives with some animated graphics and professionally designed PowerPoint. And that made a huge impact. And that's not something I did in opening, because I felt like in person, that wasn't as critical.
All right, let me put up some points in terms of length. The visual always beats the verbal. So when you put up share screen on a remote platform, usually that dominates and you go into a small box. So Ken, you did both opening and closing. Tell us how your approach differed than in person.
For me, in my perspective, the opening and closing was the most different from a traditional trial. The witnesses and the voir dire and all the rest seemed very similar, but talking to a camera instead of talking to live people in front of the jury box was quite a difference for me. And I think what we just heard, you don't want to approach it. We had a podium set up in our conference room, and I was going to do it like I was in court as well, and it just didn't feel natural. It didn't make any sense. You can see people in Zoom, you can hear people in Zoom, and we just decided to have me seated in front of a law library bookshelf, and it worked much better. But you're talking to a camera, you're not getting the same feedback, you're not walking around, it's not interactive. So you do have to practice it, you have to get comfortable with it, or it's going to feel flat and unnatural. So I think it was something you have to get used to in practice, just like, we had to learn how to get comfortable in front of a live jury. It's a different skill to get comfortable in the Zoom platform.
Thank you. Judge Williams, any comments on opening and closing from the bench? I think you're on mute.
Different skill set. It's the difference between being on the stage and being on TV. And really, you just got to remember that your gestures are going to be more compressed. People are going to see you from the waist up. Your micro expressions become much more important. And again, the reality is just it's a different scale of expression.
All right, Judge Lee, any comment on opening and closing?
You know, nothing really in addition. I defer to lawyers in that regard. I do note, though, our lawyers use PowerPoints typically in their closing and opening statements. And in closing, they'll use documents or photographs to remind somebody of, you know, who the witness was and so forth. And I actually think it's a little bit easier for jurors to see and to be following the lawyers when they are actually seeing the document right there in front of them and close up as against some distance and so forth. So, but otherwise, I don't have any further comment. You know, this is something I just defer to the counsel.
All right. So we're back to jury selection. And our options are in-person jury selection followed by an online trial, or the reverse. To do remote jury selection, where instead of bringing 100 people to the courthouse, you do it remotely. We want to address questionnaires and suggestions for efficient challenge options. So, Judge Lee, you started with in-person and then went online. Why? What's the thought process of doing it that way?
Yeah, we started out in person, mostly because in our county, we don't know ahead of time who the panel, you know, we don't know which panel is going to be assigned to a particular case. So we have a number of trials that might be going out on a particular day with a jury panel. Criminal cases go first. So the point is, we don't know who our panel is going to be in advance. As a result of that, we cannot, unlike some of the other jurisdictions, send out in advance questionnaires and so forth. And in my cases, which are lengthy cases, involving, you know, significant issues of cancer and so forth, we use almost always jury questionnaires. And the questionnaires are lengthy. They're about, 5 pages long. They've got lots of questions, long witness lists and so forth. And so we always use questionnaires in our case. And I really want to speak to the jurors and instruct them on how to fill out those questionnaires, which you really can't do you can do it in writing, but it really is, I think, more effective to do it in, essentially in person and be able to answer questions from jurors as to that issue about how they fill out the forms. And it's really important for us that in a questionnaire that they get no help from somebody if they don't understand a question. Right? If they don't understand a question, the answer is, I don't understand the question. It's not, going over to the court staff or somebody else to ask them to help out. So the instructions really are important. And the way we do it is kind of a hybrid, which is we have our jurors physically in the jury deliberation, in the jury assembly room, but we, the court and the lawyers, are on screen. We're on a screen that's in the jury assembly room. So we are actually remote in that sense. But we are talking to the jurors who are in person in the court, and they fill out their questionnaires, how long it takes them. They send them in. Part of the questions are, to what extent they have remote access. Our major issue is making sure that we have access to all our jurors. So if you cannot appear remotely, or you would have difficulty doing so, we will accommodate that in whatever way we need to. Either, if it's a hardship and we need to talk to you, we'll do it by telephone if we need to. If it's during jury voir dire and you need to come in, we will allow those jurors to be present, and we have in certain cases.
Thank you. Judge Williams, I'm going to turn this over to you, but I'm also going to tell you that Shauna has given us a question. Are these trials civil trials, or have there been any criminal proceedings? Now, I know in the state of Washington, you've done both civil and criminal cases. And in the state of Washington, it's my sense that you do the reverse, that you do remote jury selection followed by in-person trials. So can you tell us the thought process regarding that, and tell us what your experience has been in Washington with the criminal trials?
Sure, but let me begin by saying the most common phrase we all need to get used to is, "You're still on mute." We all just need to get used to that phrase. We have specific Washington State Supreme Court rules that authorize the use of video voir dire, but obviously confrontation in criminal cases drives the train, and a big chunk of our workload, like with Judge Lee's court, is criminal. And so we approached this process trying to work with sort of both sides, which meant that we first looked at the voir dire process, since we had to do criminal trials in person mostly, and civil trials we retained the ability to do that, to have in-person civil trials, but we needed to develop a process so that we could do virtual voir dire. And so we assembled a task force, a team that included staff members and included stakeholders, and we literally built a roadmap. Like Judge Lee, we frequently don't get either civil or criminal assignments until usually the week before, the Thursday before. And our jury process was the same as Judge Lee's. The juries all show up, they sit in a big room, they watch a video, maybe they fill out a questionnaire. Ultimately, what we decided to do was essentially take that room and move it into a virtual space. And I got to be blunt, what that means is that our voir dire process, and we're going to have an entire hour on this on Friday, next Friday, in one of the other panels, we essentially flip-flopped the process. We have the assignment process, and then we get a questionnaire out. We use MS Forms, a secure version of MS Forms, to do that. Any jurors that don't have technology, we contact them in person. And so what we're able to do is actually enhance, and I think there was some talk about this in the last panel, we actually expanded the ability of jurors to participate. We didn't eliminate in-person jurors. We gave the jurors the option. Do you want to come to the courthouse, or would you prefer to engage in this process remotely? But what it essentially did is it wound up kind of flip-flopping the process, so that the case was assigned, and then a panel of jurors, usually about 120 to 150, is assigned to the bench, to the judge and their staff. And then we manage that panel from that point on, rather than them sitting in a room waiting for us to call them up. We send them a questionnaire. Then the lawyers and the judge, based upon the answers to the questionnaire, will do preliminary hardships. And the jurors still haven't come to court. And then we set up the video panels, and if a juror wants to actually come down to the courthouse, they get to come down to the courthouse. And we do that panel, and that can be a hybrid panel in the sense, I just did one yesterday where I had 2 jurors that wanted to do their voir dire in person, and the lawyers were appearing remotely and did the voir dire remotely while the 3 of us, the 2 jurors and I, sat in the courtroom. And then only after that do we then select the jury, which then mostly for our criminal cases, those trials are done in person, sometimes with video witnesses after making specific confrontation findings. And same thing with the civil cases. We make specific findings under CR 42. And so basically our process, we took everything that could potentially be a vector in that, and we tried to develop a way to move it offline, with that questionnaire becoming really important. And the lawyers find that now they have all this data that they didn't have before, because the questionnaires can be very detailed. And MS Forms is a nice tool for getting it back and organizing it in a spreadsheet or a chart environment. And again, the lawyers, the ones that are able to adapt to it, can use that data. And I've actually seen lawyers really be able to drill in and develop really good questions that focus in on individual jurors and their experiences, and really learn about the jurors, which ultimately really is the primary goal of voir dire. And so I think it's actually improved the practice by being able to do that and have all that data up front.
All right, thank you. So Ken, bring us home, because you had to pick online from an advocate's view. So how did that change your approach?
Our firm's probably done 3 remote voir dires now in various trials, and universally, we found the jurors are more comfortable in their own home. They're not hassled by going downtown and finding parking and going through security, and they're not intimidated by the courtroom. And all the trappings. And I felt, my colleagues felt, that it was easier to get them talking, expressing their true views, talking to each other even over Zoom was not a difficult process. So we felt, Judge Zilli gave us only 20 minutes, but in that time we had 2 successful challenges for cause. We really felt like we knew how to use our preemptories, and we felt like we knew the jurors. We could see them closely. We could see them in their own home. We could talk to them, and I thought it was a better way to pick a jury, actually.
All right, and Corinne, I'll give you the last word. We've got about 30 seconds. I'll do the ending, but you did remote on the tail end. Would you try it on the head end with remote jury selection?
Absolutely. I would note that jury selection process varies from state to state. We use the struck method, and so this new system is going to be a totally different method of selecting jurors. But keeping in mind what Judge Williams said about getting to learn more data about each of the jurors, I'm excited to try it.
All right. Well, thank you all. I think you learned from this panel that it is ready, aim, fire, aim, fire, aim, fire. So start, and you'll achieve the 2 goals: access to justice and keeping people safe. Thank you. Good luck to each and every one of you.
Well, thank you so much to panel 2. We appreciate your time in being with us today. Fantastic information that you shared. Thank you so much. So we will now take a short break and reconvene at 5 past the hour. So about a 5-minute break at 3:05 Eastern. Despite the next video saying 4:05, we actually are only taking a 5-minute break. We'll see you very shortly. Okay, so we are ready for panel 3. Before we convene with panel 3, I just wanted to bring attention to our summit's chosen charity. It's called Everyone On. Everyone On is a non-profit dedicated to creating social and economic opportunity by connecting low-income families to affordable internet service and computers and delivering digital skills trainings. If you'd like to consider donating, please see the Everyone On widget at the bottom of your screen for a quick link to their website. And please list NETA OCP Summit on your donation form. And we thank you very much for that. Okay, so we are now ready for panel 3, Practical Tips for Completely Online Trials, which is led by Dr. Karen Lisko from Perkins Coie, and she's also a NETA faculty member. It's great to have you here, Karen. I'll leave it to you to introduce your fabulous panelists.
Thank you, Charlie. Well, the 3 words, online jury trial, are not the words any of us would have ever put together this time last year. Yet we've had to pivot in such a dramatically quick way to try to focus on administration of justice and to study what that might look like in the online forum. I have an incredible group of judges who you are about to meet who have been literally in the online forum already. And I'm going to introduce you to them through a visual montage. We're going to start with Judge Nicholas Chu, and I'm going to introduce him to you by video.
Away from your camera, you must stay on camera the entire time unless the judge allows you to. Away from your camera, you must stay on camera the entire time unless the judge allows you to take a break. Even if it's just for a quick second, you do need to stay.
But you can see me fine, you can hear me fine? Okay, perfect.
Okay, great. If you could go ahead and do that while you're waiting and then come back.
Icon with like headphones on. Do you see that at the top? Click that.
I've been a litigator, a prosecutor, and then judge, and I never thought that I would ever experience a virtual trial in my career.
I'm hoping to change your mind. We have a really great time in the 57. My committee has worked through day and night, meeting on all sorts of times, but we have a panel of 6 judges, and they've been phenomenal from day one. And I couldn't have done this. We couldn't have done this without all of us working together. I do. Wonderful. Congratulations. You're officials, members of our 57 District Court juror virtual.
Touching your service and qualifications as a juror.
Is that an accurate Google Map depiction of the area where you were located?
Yes, ma'am. We don't see any workers. And we don't see any signs. And that's because they're not there.
A lot of people were worried about how the jury would interact in this situation, or even if they would participate or show up. But what I was proud of was, at the end of the day, the jurors participated, they showed up, and they took their jobs very seriously.
And one of those persons was a woman who we had just delivered her OCA iPad. And she could not have been giddier. She came on, and I recognized the name from the waiver that I pre-filled out for her. And she's like, I can't believe I'm here. I've never been on Zoom. I've never held an iPad in my hand before. And she was just absolutely beside herself, and her attitude, her happiness was contagious.
I'm Jill Hirschman-Ross, and I was juror number 18. I just thought there's no way they're going to actually have jury duty because, nobody's going to go into an enclosed building. So at this point, and I'm certainly not going to, the next email said that it was online, and I went, they're going to do it online. And so my husband and I were both kind of like, well, that's kind of interesting. So I just thought, well, this is fine. They'll just go through the, ritual of calling people out. I'm not going to get picked. So I was actually a bit surprised when I was.
I'm Christy Figueroa, and I was juror number 3. It was really entertaining, to say the least. It was just, I kept getting the giggles because it was just so funny to see everybody with their technology and in the comfort of their own home and their different experiences. So I liked it because it was definitely an experience that I can look back on.
I was able to focus and pay attention to story, and everybody was very pleasant.
Honestly, the biggest thing was, oh man, if I screw this up, I'm going to be the representation of the Texas judiciary and the justices of the peace in Texas. So I felt a little bit of weight on my shoulders with that. But when I put on that robe and when I sat in my chair, I think all of that kind of washed away because it was just business and I had to focus on that.
Anything in the law you have to practice. That's why I call it practicing law. The same is true with judges in the judicial system. You have to try new things, whether it's in person or virtually. Once you do it for the first time, then it gets easier and easier.
The Honorable Nicholas Chu is Justice of the Peace in Travis County, Texas. He presided over the nation's first online criminal jury trial in August and was the judge you just saw featured in that video. Our next judge is the Honorable Pamela Gates. She's the civil presiding judge in Maricopa County, Arizona. She oversees the Civil Jury Trial Innovation Committee and ran pilot jury simulations to test approaches to online jury trials and in-person jury trials earlier this year. And then the Honorable Emily Miskell. Emily is a district court judge in Collin County, Texas. She made news nationally in May when she and Judge Dean presided over the first Zoom civil jury trial in the country. And we also want to note a panelist who we had hoped could join us, Ricky Raven. He is ill today, but he has contributed greatly to our insights on this panel as we prepared. Ricky was the partner with Reed Smith in the Global Commercial Disputes Group, who recently completed the 9-week online jury trial that went to verdict in Alameda County, California. If you observed the first panel today, Judge Lee is the judge to whom he tried this case along with the jury. All right, so welcome panelists. There you are. Hello. Okay, so at this point, what we want to do is move away from the PowerPoint altogether. So as a result of that, what I want to encourage you to do is maximize your media player. You see a visual right there with someone talking too much. That's a picture of me from a prior NETA program. Or choose the full screen option, because truly the most important visuals here are our esteemed panelists. What we're going to do next is we're going to go through a series of questions that we want to consider from 3 specific angles. And those angles are to have you, I'll actually go back to this slide if anyone does have that slide open. But again, encouraging you to maximize your screen so that you can see the judges. We will divide this into 3 parts. Best practices in the online pre-trial phase. Secondly, best practices throughout trial. And third, discussions about the future of the online jury trial. So let's break this out in the pre-trial phase by considering the digital divide. This has come up some in prior panels, but we have some unique perspectives among the judiciary in this specific panel about that very issue. We'll talk about best practices for orienting jurors to their online jury service. So, Judge Gates, let's begin with you. I understand you've collected an immense amount of information about what the online juror looks like in Arizona, and importantly, who that might exclude. And as we know, many refer to this as the digital divide. What can you tell us about what you've learned and possible remedies you see?
Thank you, Dr. Lisko. So in Maricopa County, just to give you a sense of size, we're the 4th largest jurisdiction in the country. And when we started to transition to an online platform, we realized that we're a court of innovation, and we always pride ourselves on being a court of innovation, but we also are focused on being an evidence-based practices court and a court that is grounded in data. And this was an area where we just didn't have data. And so we started to partner with 2 PhDs, Dr. Lisko was one, and Dr. Frederick out of Virginia, to assist us in identifying who are virtual jurors and whether we should partner technology with jury selection and with jury trials to evaluate whether it's practical and whether we should really do it. We knew we could do it, but the question was, should we? So over the course of the last 5 months, we've gathered information from over 32,000 jurors. Each month, we gather information from the online juror registration portal from about 6,500 jurors per month. On average, approximately 60% of the jurors who respond indicate that they can be jurors from home. That means that they answer yes to 5 qualifying questions. We ask them about their ability to have a private and quiet space, their ability to have a location free from interruptions, their ability to have reliable internet, access to a device that has an embedded web camera on it, and also allows them to have the physical ability to sit through a trial if they were in their own home. So part of the thing that we wanted to analyze is, what is this concept of the digital divide? What does it really mean? And we identified that the 10% of our jurors responded that they lacked a device. Now, interestingly, when we started to gather the information, the device that we were asking them about was just a device with a web camera. So a smartphone, a tablet, a laptop, a desktop, all were sufficient in order to qualify as a juror from home. Throughout the course of our further simulations, we've realized that jurors who serve as jurors from home on smartphones or tablets are very limited in their capacity. And they don't have the same experience that jurors who are serving using a laptop or a desktop are able to experience. So we had 11% of our jurors that indicated that they had lack of reliable internet. 19% indicated that they lacked a private and quiet space. 24% indicated that they lacked the physical ability to serve as a juror, and 33% indicated that they lacked a place free from interruption. When we broke those jurors down into demographics, analyzing men and women, different race, looking at age different brackets, we realized that the digital divide, as you would expect, is real. We had more women who were responding to our online juror summons, and those women were disproportionately indicating that they lacked an environment free from interruption. Our jurors who were over the age of 75 overwhelmingly indicated that they lacked a device that was available for them to serve as a juror from home. Interestingly, however, the age bracket of 60 to 69 did not identify similar obstacles. We also identified across all 5 qualifying questions that those who identified as Hispanic or Latino reported a decreased ability to serve as a juror from home on all 5 qualifying questions. So as we continued to analyze who these individuals were, we started to evaluate how could we solve those problems. We started to identify the importance of the device that the individuals used, the importance of ensuring that we were able to provide them with a quiet and available space so that they could serve as a juror from home. So we've gathered a lot of information to try and ensure that, to the extent that lawyers choose this as an option, we know how to negate some of the challenges and problems.
Thank you, Judge Gates. That's important data to consider, and we'll talk even more about remedies that other courts have also looked at to deal with this digital divide to ensure access. So, Judge Chu, I understand from your experience in the online real-world jury trial in the criminal matter over which you presided, that you also provided material to orient these jurors to how this process would go. So can you tell us a little bit about what you saw as best practices in dealing with those orientations?
Sure. I think the number one thing that we need to realize when we're figuring out how to best communicate to these potential jurors is start out with the idea that they don't know anything about the court system, but also they don't know anything about how to log on to Zoom. If you start out with that base knowledge, what we did was we provided a jury notice that I think we have on one of our slides that says essentially it gave a step-by-step instruction of what the expectations are, that this was a virtual jury trial, that they were not to come into a physical space in the courtroom, that they were going to be doing this in a quiet space in the comfort of their own homes, what devices were appropriate for that, what were the steps if they didn't have those devices or the appropriate high-speed internet access, the date and time of a test run, but also how to log on with pictures and little arrows of where to go and click on. We did this with the expectation that people understand whether some people do better with written instructions, some people do better with graphics, and so we kind of went with that. And then for those who did not have access to technology or high-speed internet, we provided court-issued iPads from the Office of Court Administration, our Texas administrative apparatus here, and we gave those to the 5 jurors that said that they didn't have access to technology. And my bailiff delivered those to those folks' homes, and from their porch, she was able to show those folks how this worked and how everything set up. So it's one of those things where it just takes practice, but also coming from the understanding that assume that people don't know how to do the thing that you've been doing for a few months now.
Well, it sounds really thorough, especially since this was the first foray into an online criminal trial. So my hat is off to you and your court staff and being able to make that possible. Judge Gates, I want to go back to you for just a second. I know in your recent pilots in Arizona, you literally took jurors through technology checks and other instructions. So what did you find to be important best practices in that process?
Well, through the course of days of jury selection and then a fully virtual civil trial, we got better at trying to learn what jurors were going to do that were the challenges. We've become incredibly effective at figuring out how to handle jurors when they're in person in our courtroom and they fall asleep, or you can tell they're checking their Apple Watch, or those challenges that we experience every day. We just have to become better at experiencing and minimizing the challenges on the online setting. So the first thing that we discovered was the importance of ensuring that every juror knew how to stop the proceeding if they were unable to hear something or they were unable to see something. We always manage that physically in the courtroom. We just have to have a similar situation for online, especially when it's someone's camera freezes and they're not able to alert us that they're unable to hear or see. So we went through a series of different steps so that we could ensure that every juror could stop the proceeding if in fact they couldn't see or hear something. We also ensured that the jurors were able to identify the different views so that they could change to active speaker if they wanted to really gauge the credibility of a witness, or they wanted to watch the opening and closing just viewing the one lawyer. We also ensured that we gave access to the chat feature. In Arizona, jurors have the opportunity to ask questions. We did note an interesting change in behavior. When jurors are in person, sometimes they are a bit reluctant to ask questions. They have papers in their binders and they fill out the papers, and my bailiff walks across the courtroom and everyone is looking at them, and we watch as they complete their question and hand it to my bailiff. Online, they just privately put in a chat to me with their questions. It was a flood of questions. So we did give them access to the ability to ask questions, and I would have to say in our defamation one-day trial, we probably had 40 questions. We realized that accessibility to privately ask those questions made jurors very willing to get their questions to the judge.
Well, because I had the privilege of working with you in this endeavor, I got to see that you also were your own technical bailiff. And certainly within the Online Courtroom Project, as we monitor things nationwide and have been doing since March, we've noticed that technical bailiff is now a term of art in terms of what people are looking at. You were a unique judge in the regard that you were able to do that for yourself. And you're in good company because, hello, Judge Miskell. We're excited to hear from you next. All right, okay, because if people watching tuned in through YouTube and saw the live proceedings of the first ever civil jury trial, they saw you also serving as a technical bailiff. So you were pulling double duty in this case, and I'm curious, what did you observe as necessary pretrial preparation, whether it was from your perspective from the bench or what you would assume is important from the litigator's perspective?
definitely there is a lot that you need to practice with pre-trial. So, for example, first of all, the main thing is to practice with your client and with the witnesses from where they will be dialing in. So I frequently spend a lot of time throughout my day troubleshooting people's audio connections, their video connections, knowing what type of device they're on, and saying things like, okay, tap the 3 dots at the top of your screen. Do you see the menu option that says whatever? And so, the attorneys are, shuffling, oh, I'm so sorry for the delay, Judge. And I'll ask questions like, oh, well, did it work when you practiced this in advance? And they'll say, well, we didn't practice. Okay, so that's a problem. Practice with your witness from the place that they'll be, from the device that they'll be, so that they know how to connect and you can hear their audio and see their video. Secondly, for the attorneys, it's important to have your setup. So in the jury trial that we did, so I'm doing this every day and I have like a 4-screen setup. I'm looking at the YouTube, I'm looking at the real time for my court reporter, I'm looking at exhibits, I'm looking at Zoom. I've got a lot to look at. And so I use 3 different devices and 4 screens. One of the attorneys who participated in the trial tried to do it all from one laptop. Okay, and it is hard to open the exhibit that you're about to share, watch the trial, do everything that you need to do from one device. So I would say a multiple monitor setup is probably going to help you have a better time. Likewise, a lot of times the lawyer and client will want to appear together in the same place. And so, for example, if they both try to share a laptop, and this happens a lot in my court, you'll have the lawyer and the client right there side by side. But laptop microphone technology is so good now that it cancels the noise of the second speaker. And so we really just can't hear when people try to do that. Well, on Amazon, you can get a conference table microphone for like $18. It's just a USB. It looks like an Alexa. You can plug it in, and then that way you can be in a conference room with your client and we can hear both of you. So depending on if you're going to be using separate devices, that's not a problem. But if you want to be together in the same room with other people who are participating, you'll need to look at some technology. You might think about whether you want to wear a headset. I'm wearing a headset today because the room I'm in is echoing, but it hurts my ears if I try to wear it all day. And so I've gone through a number of headsets that I've bought and returned. And now I've just settled on, I bought a cheap microphone off Amazon. The microphone that was built into my webcam was not good enough. So test your setup, because when you're in the middle of a trial, you don't want to be worrying about troubleshooting audio, and you want to have some things that aren't very expensive that make your experience more comfortable so that you can be focused on your attorney job. Think about your exhibits and how you're going to screen share them. So many attorneys will screen share the exhibits themselves, but also some attorneys will have their paralegal sign on to the Zoom, and the paralegal's job is just to screen share the exhibits. So they'll say, okay, can you put up exhibit 2? And then you have a person there who's worried about that, so you can worry about other things. Both ways work fine. It just depends on what is more comfortable for you, and talk to your judge about it, because none of us have any problem with someone helping you if it makes things go more smoothly. Last thing I would say is practice on screen sharing your exhibits, because I see a lot of oopsies with people screen sharing their desktop instead of just the exhibit. And so we can see, like, if you have your Outlook set to preview messages, we can see like your health appointment is coming up and stuff that we don't really want to know about. So make sure you know how to share your exhibits so that you don't share your personal email or your desktop icons that, aren't our business.
Wow, the 3 of you have already given us a lot of shortcuts. I mean, that's what's nice about the benefit of your experience, because it helps people start out if, in fact, their jurisdiction or trial is moving online. So you've already added a great deal of value. And Judge Miskell, I want to continue with you, because we're going to now move into the different phases of trial, starting with jury selection. Now, because your online civil jury trial occurred in May, I have to believe a lot of the jurors and perhaps court personnel were learning their way around Zoom at that point. So 2 questions for you based on that. 1, how did the process go during jury selection? And second, what did it teach you about effective jury selection in the online forum?
Well, one of the things I wanted to mention is our clerk told us that ordinarily our yield is about, what did I write down? 45% for jurors appearing for in-person jury duty pre-COVID. And our yield for our first online jury trial was 86%. So we got almost double yield compared to our pre-COVID in-person jury trials. So that's something to think about. Obviously, more people willing to serve online than typically are willing to drive a courthouse. What I have noticed personally throughout my, so I've been doing online proceedings since March. I do online every day, all day. I do trials every day and hearings. And what I have observed is that litigants, the people, not the lawyers, but the people involved, primarily participate through a phone or a tablet. And lawyers will usually have a laptop. Sometimes lawyers are participating through an iPad, but ordinarily everybody that's a regular person is on a phone or a tablet, and everybody that's a lawyer is on a computer. And so by this point in time, I'm pretty good at troubleshooting. Back when we did the jury trial in May, as you said, I checked in each panel member individually and oriented their device, made sure we could hear their sound, made sure we could hear their video. I even more than that know now how to troubleshoot everybody's different kind of device. So I usually ask them, what kind of device are you on? Okay, tap here, tap there. So one thing, if you're going to be doing online jury stuff, is you'll need to practice yourself accessing the Zoom or whatever platform you're using from an iPhone, an Android phone, a tablet, a computer, because your jurors are going to be connecting in all those ways and you'll need to troubleshoot it. Which leads to my second point, which is I spent 45 minutes at the beginning of that jury trial troubleshooting everyone's online connections. Now that we do that every day, I was finding myself, not being in the appropriate mood to begin hearing evidence, because I have just spent the first 45 minutes of my day troubleshooting IT, which is not really my favorite thing to do and not what I signed up for when I became a judge. So speaking of technical bailiff, what I do now is I have my court coordinator check everyone in, and she makes sure their audio and video are working. And then I sign on when it's time to start the trial. So it makes it a lot easier for me. But that's what I would recommend, is some judges will let their staff handle it at the beginning. Just, I don't want to figure it out. That seems really hard. I'm just going to let my staff do it. But I think you do yourself a disservice when you delegate that. And delegate, what I mean is delegate knowing all the different technology, because when you're in the middle of trial, you don't want to feel like there's something you can't fix. And so just putting in the time to practice in advance on different devices will make you more confident and competent in the trial, in the jury selection. You'll seem more competent to the jurors. You'll be a helper. And I'll pause there. I know you have other questions.
Sounds good. Well, just listening to you, it strikes me how adaptable judges are compared to all of us, because we are in this online world now. And a lot of people were not even conversant with any platform by video, let alone in a courtroom setting. So it sounds like there's a lot of adapting that's gone on very, very quickly. Judge Chu, I want to pivot to you and ask you a similar question from your criminal trial experience. What is your best advice for your colleagues and for litigators in online jury selection?
Sure. For online jury selection, whether in Texas we call it voir dire, I think in other places we call it voir dire, but in Texas we always like to be different, I think. But for the most part, for my colleagues, I would suggest that you divide up the panel into bite-sized, manageable pieces. So for example, I had 30 panel members, and then I had a bailiff and 2 clerks check in those, and each, as they were pulled in, we put them into breakout rooms and divided up each breakout room into 10 people, so that my clerks and bailiff that were checking in folks and doing the audio checks and telling them how to orient their screen, they only had to deal with 10 folks as opposed to 1 by 1, 30 folks. And so that made the check-in process a lot quicker. The second thing I would probably suggest for the judicial part is go through a couple of test runs and make sure that those test runs are done with other people in your, whether it's the county or city or jurisdiction, and with people that don't know anything about court technology or anything like that. Send an example is my district clerk's office we asked District Clerk Velvet Price if we could borrow some of her employees for the day to run a mock jury selection. And she said, sure. She selected 30 folks that had no understanding of or no experience in our court system. We sent them a mock notice, saw at 9 o'clock on the test day if they got on okay, if there's anything that we learned. And we learned a lot from the instructions about what worked, what didn't, what we thought made sense, but came off differently for them. And for the attorneys, I would suggest, number one, make sure that you do your voir dire and cast the voir dire screen. We use Zoom. Make sure you cast that onto a big screen TV or a large monitor. That way you could see facial expressions in the different boxes. I think back then, Zoom allowed up to 20 video boxes. And so the bigger the screen, the better it is. And then the second is make sure you have, whether it's an associate, another attorney, or a paralegal, or an intern, somebody there to help you manage looking at those screens. Because when you're doing during jury selection, you're just kind of focused on getting through the presentation, but you'll be missing some of the stuff from the screen, such as an eye roll from juror number 30 or something like that. So I would probably suggest those are the main things that attorneys should watch out for. One thing that I've learned too is approach this voir dire as something that is different, that is a new way of doing this jury selection. So don't think, okay, I'm going to do voir dire like how I used to do and just adapt it to the online format. That won't work. It won't be as smooth, or it won't be as effective. And it also, we ran into issues. I tried to replicate that in the first minute by having everybody turn on their mics. And I realized that doesn't work because there's 30 people with audio on. And even if they're quiet, having a live audio feed would just develop or envelop the broadband feed so it pixelated and slowed down everything. So I had to mute everybody, and then only the person or the jury member that was speaking had to turn on their mic. And so that's something that I think is really important to realize when you start this endeavor.
And just actually on that note, if I may interrupt, we are picking up some background noise from one of the panelists. So if we could just have you mute when you're not speaking, and that would be really helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Charlie. Well, Judge Chu, you mentioned some. Oh, yes. Go ahead, Judge Gates.
Sorry, Dr. Lisko. I just wanted to add in response to my colleagues on the panel, sharing some additional information that we learned about the jurors and what they're doing in their own private space. One thing that we realized that you want to add into the voir dire process is to help the jurors help themselves avoid checking emails, checking texts, doing work. Just as Judge Miskell mentioned, she has multiple monitors up, so do your jurors. And so you want to make sure that you address what's going on in their other monitors, encouraging them to minimize and to exit out of their other applications so that they're not receiving notifications. Because if their email is up on their other screen, they're just so tempted during the trial to watch that other screen. So that's integrating part of that into voir dire becomes pretty important to ensure that the jurors are focused.
Judge Gates, I'm glad you brought that up, because one thing we all talked about in our preparation with Ricky Raven is in his 9-week jury trial, one of the remedies the court came to was the court issued exactly the same laptop to every seated juror. And so that gave the court some measure of confidence that for that laptop, at least, they had access to one program. And that was only to get into the trial. Now, there still had to be an admonition, because what would prevent a juror, if they're not being ethical, from having a companion laptop of their own or being on their phone? So it did require an element of trust and also some monitoring in terms of what you could visually see of the juror who was required to be on screen at all times. But it did seem, from what Ricky commented to us, that it was very, very useful. Now, he did, by the way, say, in case anybody's curious, that the parties paid for the rental of those devices. So it did come at a literal cost. It sounded like it was fairly modest, but it also made the trial proceed. We also have a question in the Q&A from David, and he is asking, what functionalities would you like to see from video teleconferencing software that does not currently exist with Zoom? And I should have teed one of you up because I'm about to surprise you. Judge Miskell, what would you say to that? Video teleconferencing software.
Absolutely. So as Zoom has gone through various iterations since March, they have given more and more control away from the meeting host to the meeting attendee. So it used to be that I could mute and unmute people. Now I cannot unmute any participant. I have to ask them to unmute. It used to be that I could move people back and forth to breakout rooms. Now I cannot force them to move. I have to persuade them to move. And so I spend a lot of my day saying, all right, ma'am, do you see the button that says leave? Okay, if you're on this kind of device, tap the 3 dots, you'll see a button that says leave. You can choose leave breakout room. Don't choose leave meeting, you know. And so I spend all my day trying to persuade people to go places. And as we know from a courtroom, the courtroom works because people don't get a choice. You have to follow instructions. And so I wish that the Zoom experience was more like the courtroom experience where the host tells everyone where to go.
Okay, well, Judge Miskell, I want to go to the next phase and continue with you. And let's talk about oral argument. Now, you recently told me that you've presided over, is this number right, 120 online bench trials so far this year.
Yes, at the end of September, it was 115. So I've got 6 more weeks since then. So it's beyond that.
So how does that inform what you would say or advise to litigators about being effective in oral argument in this online presence?
Yeah, so it's interesting. One of the pieces of feedback that I got back from a fellow judge was because the technology makes it hard to interrupt and makes it hard to talk while someone else is talking, you know that you're not going to be heard, that we are seeing the attorneys cut each other off less. And in practice, what this other judge noticed was that it meant that women and younger attorneys and other people who typically describe an experience of getting cut off all the time, are having more uninterrupted speaking time and are getting more talking turns. And so I've tried to pay attention since someone pointed that out to me, and I think it may be true. So that may be a side effect, is that it helps with civility because it's just harder to steamroll someone on Zoom. We have more of a turn-taking atmosphere. I will say one of the things that is persuasive specifically for a closing argument. I think Zoom is and I say Zoom, I'm not promoting one particular platform. That's just the one I use. But a lot of good attorneys who are great at closing argument use the document camera or the Elmo, and they'll whip those exhibits on and off that document camera while they are giving a closing argument or draw on them or whatever it might be. And it can be very persuasive. I have always found that Elmo technology to be clunky. And I think on Zoom, it can be a lot more smooth if you practice with it. So you have the ability to have tools where you can screen share an exhibit, you can annotate, you can highlight and draw on it. So for example, we did a bench trial over 5 days that involved something like 12 entities, total value of about $300 million. But there were a ton, as you can imagine, of partnership agreements, LLC agreements, just a variety of corporate documents. And in person, that would have meant binders of exhibits, and we would have spent a lot of time flipping and say, mine doesn't have a page 17. Which one are you looking at? Whereas on Zoom, it's much easier to throw up the correct LLC agreement, turn right to the provision you're talking about, and highlight it for everybody so that we are definitely all looking at number 17 together. And I think that is an enhancement to your effectiveness in your argument. And so I think, of course, it takes a little practice in advance to be smooth with it, but I think that's one thing that's potentially better than in person.
That's excellent. All right, so let's move forward to witness examination. And Judge Gates, before I ask you to talk to us about that, there actually was a question posed to you specifically by Patty, and she wanted to ask you, Judge Gates, with that barrage of juror questions you mentioned a few minutes ago, how do you think you would handle that in the online trial format?
Well, I think you have to handle it the same way you do in person. We had one juror who submitted 142 questions during a sex trial. Sometimes you just have jurors who ask a lot of questions. I think you need to allocate time. So, for example, when you have a finite amount of time for a trial, which is something we do in civil, we don't do in criminal, and you realize that you're starting to erode the time limits that the lawyers have because it's being eaten up by the juror questions, you have to reassess. You have to decide, can I extend this trial? And if so, do I need to ensure that the jurors are available to do that? If they're not available, there may be some self-correcting conduct. Alternatively, you might need to restrict the lawyer's time, or you might need to start stealing half hours from lunch so that you start to build in some additional time. I think what you need to do is start to identify that early, that this is a trend and a pattern, and realize how that you need to adjust for it quickly so that you ensure that when you get closer to the end of trial, now you just haven't run out of time and you've extended or you've exhausted the amount of time you told the jurors that you were going to be in trial.
That is very helpful. All right, so let me then narrow to witness examination. I know that in the Arizona pilot, you piloted both in person, socially distanced with safety measures, courtroom trial with witness examination. Then you did exactly that same case in the online forum. So how did those two comparative kinds of circumstances inform you about best practices for witness examination in the online forum?
So as you mentioned, we did the exact same trial in person. And through that pilot, we tested face guards or face masks, clear face shields. We tested face masks, so those cloth coverings. We also tested the use of plexiglass. And then our PhDs interviewed all of our participants and our jurors about that information. One of the observations of the jurors was the challenge in being able to corroborate or validate a witness's emotional reaction. So our witness was tearful. She cried in person. She cried when she was online. But the jurors who were observing her when she had a face covering on were unable to see those facial cues, that ability for them to corroborate she really is crying. This is truly authentic. This is how she is feeling based on the testimony that she's giving. Conversely, when she was online, they could see the tears coming down her face, unimpeded by a face covering. And so I think that difference was important. The other two points that I think were different between the online and the in-person is how far away the jurors were. Because when we're in person, all of my jurors can't sit in my jury box. I have to spread them out. Some are seated in the gallery, some are seated in the jury box. So the jurors who are in the gallery are quite far away from my witness stand. The plexiglass is clear, their line of sight is clear, we ensure, but they're still pretty far away from the witness, and they're only able to see from the bridge of her nose up. When you compare that to the jurors being able to see that witness in a full screen as she's testifying, if they're in a view speaker mode, they can see everything about her. Now, they did also identify the importance of her background, what was in her background as she testified. The other thing that I thought was really interesting, we're used to jurors all facing the well or all facing the witness. They don't tend to ever talk about what the other jurors are doing during the trial. During our online simulation, however, the jurors were very attentive to what the other jurors were doing during jury selection and during trial, because they were watching the other jurors as they were receiving evidence. When you watch in a sex assault case and you see that the jurors are starting to become emotional, that is, you as the judge are identifying one juror who's having that reaction. In this instance, when they're online, they're all watching each other receive evidence, and they're gaining those cues not only necessarily from the witness and the lawyers, but from each other. And it was just a unique experience and something to be attentive to.
Thank you very much. By the way, Judge Gates, we're getting a lot of questions in the Q&A about whether there is a way to see the results of this research.
Of our, what our data is?
The pilots?
Well, I guess I can, after this, I can talk to our researchers. I know I am planning to try and author a piece to put into some publications so that we can synthesize the experience between the online simulation and the in-person simulation, and then all of the research. So hopefully we'll be able to put that together, and hopefully I can have the help of my extraordinary partners of the researchers who did all of the legwork in gathering the important information.
So stay tuned.
The answer to the question is that will motivate me to make sure that it is public and published.
Excellent. Well, your researchers will be right by your side on that. I've made that commitment. All right. So I actually want to pivot to a question to Judge Chu in terms of just overall thinking about criminal trials. So this is an impromptu question for you, Judge Chu. What are your thoughts about, first of all, where you would see this going? In other words, is the criminal online trial something you would encourage the criminal bar to try, to embrace? What are your thoughts?
There's probably, like all things, it's probably a yes and no. I think for serious felony in custody cases, it'd probably be inappropriate to have an online jury trial just for the seriousness of those types of cases, but also because it wades into, it's one of those situations that it'll probably be better for online trials there, especially because a lot of those serious violent felony cases rely on a lot of physical evidence. But in terms of, for example, in my case, it was a speeding ticket case. So low-level nonviolent offenses or even misdemeanor cases, perhaps even driving while intoxicated cases, where they don't rely on a lot of physical evidence like a bloody axe or a weapon or a knife, but instead a lot of video evidence or a lot of document evidence, maybe even white-collar crime cases. This may be an appropriate case. I would probably say online jury trials would be better suited in the criminal context for out-of-custody criminal cases rather than in-custody cases, because it's a lot easier to facilitate client to defense attorney communication out of custody with text messaging apps or other computers where somebody is able to, the digital post-it note of sliding a post-it note in trial doesn't really happen. So you have to send a text message. And that's what we kind of did in our criminal jury trial. And so I think obviously the priority in a lot of jurisdictions for in-person jury trials will be to, they're going to be few, but the priority will be felony, violent, in-custody jury trials. So this may be a great alternative to move cases out of the docket. And actually, if you have a client who is out of custody, who is willing to just want their day in court so they can start moving on with their life, this is a good alternative to have a virtual jury trial that, at some point too, I'm sure judges would be appreciative of the fact of getting that opportunity to move cases, but also giving defendants and the state or the Commonwealth an opportunity to hear a case fairly.
Thank you for that insight. We have 6 precious minutes left, so I wish I had an hour and 6 with the 3 of you, but I want to pivot, Judge Miskell, to you to see if you have more you'd like to add about managing exhibits in the online civil trial.
Exhibits have probably been the part of this that haven't been totally resolved in a smooth way. So in my jurisdiction, the court reporter is the person who keeps all the exhibits. And if the case is appealed, the court reporter provides the exhibits to the appellate court. So in person, that's not hard because the parties will just hand her the exhibit during the trial. When we went to online trials, and even in person, sometimes an attorney will walk out of the courthouse with an original exhibit and she has to hound them down and get him to bring it back. And sometimes we have to have a hearing on, is this the same exhibit? Yes, it is. Okay. But one of the first problems with online hearings is, how is the court reporter going to preserve the exhibits? It will not work if everyone just uses exhibits throughout an online proceeding and then she has to hunt everyone down later to try to get the exhibits that they used. Okay, so that just is not going to work. So what we decided to do, the second problem is a lot of my trials, for example, would be a domestic violence protective order. And so sometimes the applicant will serve the respondent, and the first time the respondent appears or gets a hold of anyone or participates in the suit is when they log on to the Zoom for their Zoom trial. And so they may connect through a phone connection. We can't control, because we don't have their email address. All they do is be served and show up for their Zoom trial. So that if they connect by phone, we don't have the ability to let them review exhibits before or during their trial. So what we decided was to have everyone submit their exhibits in advance. And so the attorneys, don't like losing their ambush factor of being able to pull out the exhibits for the first time mid-trial. But, our discovery rules are designed to avoid trial by ambush anyway. And it's much more effective to say you need to submit your exhibits to the court in advance. Number one, that makes sure everybody can see it. If somebody has a tech issue and their video connection drops out and they're only participating by telephone, they have copies of the exhibits so they're not missing out on the information. And the second thing is, for our trial purposes, my court reporter has all the exhibits. I have all the exhibits. We know we're all looking at the same exhibit. And so what we're doing functionally right now is everyone just emails their exhibits to us. And then my coordinator saves it to a Dropbox. And my court reporter and I have access to the Dropbox. Now, I mentioned that large trial that we had. They had gigs and gigs of exhibits. Obviously, they can't email it all in. What we did was we set up Dropbox folders for them, and they uploaded their own exhibits. I have tested some, solutions that are being marketed for that, and none of them have so far solved the problem as good as emailing it in Dropboxes. But I think that's one area where technology will catch up with our needs to have.
Well, there's clearly a lot to consider, and you've already done part of that legwork for the rest of us. So that's another thing I want to mention is the Online Courtroom Project is continuing to put together information on best practices, and everything you are telling us is something that's going to make all of us smarter, and we'll be moving into that information as well. In our last few minutes, Judge Gates, I want to turn to you because in terms of juror bonding, this is a question that was on the minds of some of the prior panelists today, a concern about that. And knowing that juror bonding, of course, could be crucial to a productive jury deliberation process. So what are your thoughts about best practices to try to ensure that bonding does occur in this new online environment?
So thank you. Early on in the pandemic, that was one of the most significant concerns for me, because we all realize that there's that magic that happens in the jury room throughout the course of trial. The jurors decide to show up on Wednesday all wearing Hawaiian shirts, or they have potlucks back in the jury deliberation room, or they all go with each other out for karaoke. They have this bond, and it's important to them because not only is it critical to forming those relationships, but they start to evaluate opinions that other jurors might have as they near that period of deliberation. And when you have that virtual experience, the question was, can we replicate that magic? And one of our realities was, I'm not sure we can replicate that magic in person anymore. Initially, we had to have jurors spread out all over the court complex because our jury deliberation rooms were too small. They couldn't be in those small spaces anymore together. Now we've since grown and learned, and we've identified larger spaces so that we can have that bonding experience for them in in-person trials. But we do believe that it's important to have that as a critical component in virtual trials. So they need to have their own channel. In our platform, we have a virtual channel that the jurors have, which is their jury deliberation space. I don't have access to it. My staff doesn't have access to it. It's just where they hang out. And then we can upload their exhibits at the time of deliberation. But we feel that ability to replicate that experience to the extent that we explore the use of virtual trials is a critical component.
Thank you so much. And we are a minute over time, so I'm going to wrap up at this point and thank the three of you so much for your energy, for your wisdom. Is the online trial something that is going to happen with accelerated inevitability? If it is, if it's going to become something more commonplace, then you have all made us wiser with your comments and your insights. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you all so much, and absolutely, especially to you, Karen, great moderation there.
So if you're a coach, consultant, service provider, or course creator, the last thing you want to hear about is you want to hear another person telling you how you can get all these clients and all this different type of stuff, right? Instead of doing that, if you want to get more clients, you want to make more money in your business, watch the rest of this video. If not, go ahead and click skip right now, okay? So if you're still watching this video, let's just jump up to my screen real quick. I'm gonna just show you some proof of how powerful this strategy is that I'm about to give you, and I'm gonna show you how you can get it for 100% free. So let's jump over to my screen right now. All right, cool. So now we're over here on my screen. So let me just show you. So these are individuals who applied the strategies that you're about to get access to when you click on the link. So this is Simone applied the strategies, got to $1 million run rate while cutting the work time in half. Marcus added an extra 6 figures to his revenue in only 8 hours of work per week. This gentleman right here is 13 years old. When he was 12 when he started applying the strategies, he's made over $105,000 at the time of his interview. He actually did $160,000 last month, right? Yeah, he's 13 years old. Zahn actually grew his coaching business from brand new to 5 figures in 100 days by following these strategies. Joy started enrolling $5,000 clients back to back. Jasmine turned her annual income to her monthly income. Courtney did over $28,000 in 60 days. Felicia's just killing things. She's doing like $100,000 a month now. Desiree was able to quit her job, start scaling, grow her business. Started with $10 per day ad budget, turned his monthly income into his weekly income. I could literally go on and on and on. Joseph actually did $87,000 last month, if I'm not mistaken. The dude Kelly said he generated $144,000 in revenue since he started implementing these strategies as well. He messaged me the other day. And the list just goes on and on, literally. $32,000 in only 6 weeks. So these are people just giving us feedback on the strategy that you're about to get access to when you click on the link right now. Here's many, many more. Keto, 14,000, 24 hours while on the beach, 19,000 while in the Bahamas, 20X's income, 23,000. I can literally go on and on. It never stops, to be honest with you. 60,000 on a Saturday. And if I go down here some more, $32,000 from $625 in ad spend, $4,000 per month to $22,500 in 30 days. They said they're not $49,000. And if I skip down here, $35,000 only 34 days, $37,000 in only 7 days. And if I go down here, it's $75,000 in 34-ish days, $35,000 a month, right? $31,000 in sales in 3 weeks, $16,500 in 50 days. The list just goes on. This young lady right here messaged me the other day. She's done about $40,000 since implementing the strategies as well. I could literally go on and on and on, and I could do what everybody else doing, log into our account and show you how much money we're making and all that, but who cares, right? I want to give you the blueprint and show you how other people's applying it and getting results and how you can too. So click on the link. If you're on desktop, I think the link should be over here. If you're on mobile, it should be over here somewhere, but click on it right now. It'll take you over to a page to get access to our paid ad playbook. It's going to show you how to get 50 to 100 leads every single day that convert into clients, just like the ones you're seeing right here, right? And I'm going to give you some bonus training videos that go along with the playbook just to make sure you can actually implement and start getting results. So go ahead and click on the link somewhere around this video right now. It'll take you over to the page, get immediate access. And I'm looking forward to hearing your success story and putting your testimony on this page as well. All right, talk to you soon. Click on the link right now and we'll talk soon.
Attention Raleigh, North Carolina homeowners. Are you tired of paying Duke Energy an expensive electricity bill? Well, if that's the case, you could be saving upwards of $100, $200, or even $300 a month by switching to solar. In the year 2020, North Carolina homeowners are able to save thousands through local, state, and federal tax incentives. Unfortunately, by the end of 2020, these incentives are dropping. So don't wait to see how much you can save by going solar. Click the link below to take a 2-minute survey to see if you qualify for getting your first 18 months free.